The Pandemonium Complex by Screwy Louis 24. I've lived at this complex for a few months now. The people and things that live here are far from normal to say at the least. Things that nightmares are even afraid of. I can't leave because it won't let me. The complex provides everything I need to survive, if you know where to go. The only safe place is my room number 224. And it's finally provided me with a computer to reach the outside world. It knows it can trust me now, and I'm no longer trying to leave. This place is my home now. I've accepted that. The thing that runs this place takes the form of a male bellhop in a straw boat hat and names itself Winthrop. But I've seen what it really is and what it can do. It is God in here, and as long as we're in its realm, there's nothing anyone can do here about it. It mostly stays at the lobby's concierge desk if you ever wish to speak to it directly. But we all know its placement and appearance is just a formality to make us feel at least a little comfortable in our home. It and the complex are connected and yet separate. A god and a living universe, together in symbiosis. They're both mostly harmless as long as you abide by the rules. 1. A tenant must never kill or fatally harm another tenant willingly. 2. Nothing may leave, but all can enter. 3. Your room is safe. 4. Rule 1 is void when in another's room, but only to the room's tenant. 5. Damaging the complex or its property on purpose is strictly forbidden. You'd think these rules would stop anything from hurting you, but all those rules did was make things that live here more creative in what they can do to you. There are things worse than death and pain. I've seen some that have fallen victim to the other tenants' creativity. Like me, there are some humans that live here, and other mortal beings from either different worlds, realities, times, and everything beyond and between. Some have abilities on their own, and some are nothing more than mortals with flesh and blood like myself. I've learned some things while living here and how to survive. The most recent was the victim of him and her. Him and her are dangerous to say at the least, but minor compared to the other things I've seen. Him and her are shadow people, but not the kind that you know of. The two don't peek around corners or disappear when you see them. They make sure you can see them. The fear you permeate just makes the game more fun to them. Imagine a great white shark in the open ocean that's bored, and all there is you and him. You can't escape them. There's shadows everywhere, and the shadows are their room. The first you will see is him. I've seen him, but for now he has no interest in me. Just seeing him won't make you a target. That just means you have his curiosity, but not his interest yet. He is a tall shadow man. They can change their size and shape, but most often he's about 7 feet tall. Looks as if he's wearing a fedora hat and a long coat. He has no features and is black as the darkest void. If you try to stare at him, you'll only make yourself a target. The only reason why I know his appearance is because I rode the elevator with him a few times and only once alone. Only glance, but never stare. Luckily, I know better than to stare at anything in this place, and I thought I was his new target until we seemingly reached his floor first, and he was gone. They only appear and disappear. Even they can't seem to travel boundless in this place, and luckily the complex is always illuminated pretty well. There's rumors that they're the reason why Rule 5 was created, since the shadows are their domain. Can't have them messing with its lights as they please, I guess. If you see him too much, that means you've caught his attention, but he is not what you should be worried about. If he's following you, that means run and hide. Him is warning you. Her is coming. One day, however, on my way back to my room, I got about halfway to my door before looking down the long hallway and seeing him staring. I averted my gaze to respectably let him continue, but when I looked back, he was still there. At this time, I've only heard tales of what this means. I gave him one more chance and averted my gaze to check again. He was still there. Taking no chances, I began running in his direction towards my room. Your room is safe, and I heard he's not the one I should be afraid of. I ran as fast as I possibly could, and her footsteps quickly gaining on me from behind. Looking back will only slow me down. I pushed as hard as I could towards my room, running and hearing those steps gaining on me easily. Suddenly, I was violently pushed to the right side of the hall with the force of a hulking beast. I guarded my face to try and stop what should be impossible to happen to me, only to hear the running continue down the hall where I was running towards. I looked and saw that I wasn't being chased. I was in the way of another apex predator that was now just as far down the food chain as me, a Wendigo. Due to the rules of the complex, some things in this place are made entirely handicapped to hunt. One of these things was a Wendigo that I've seen from time to time. We passed each other in the hall, and I've seen other Wendigos living here too. They are no pushover. Standing tall, they can match the height of him. They're skin to bone skinny, the palest of white skin. Their lips and eyelids have rotted off from hunting and feeding, leaving only dangled rotten raw flesh. Their eyes are always open and vigilant, but clouded like a blind man. They have almost no gums left to show the full display of what was once human-looking teeth. Long but few inky black hair remain on this one. Its hands and feet are at least twice as long as humans. Their nails on their hand and feet match the status of their teeth. Black with rot, but long and sharp to hunt their prey. Black veins that once pumped human blood in their human lives, and now just holding coagulated remains. In the right circumstance, even a weak one can wipe out a small well-armed village. Even though they're not allowed to harm me, I always gave them a respectable distance, and this one was running for its life. I looked toward where it was running from and regretfully wished I hadn't. That's when I saw her. Her is similar to him in base appearance. A shadow woman, tall and thin. She towers over him and looks as if she's wearing a gown. Her hair flows away from her head and moves like the wind gently blowing it all around. They dance so slowly and methodically, like they're hypnotizing you. But what makes her all the more terrifying is, unlike him, her has a face. Like the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland, she only has a mouth and eyes. Her features float in the void that would be her face. Teeth that look like they belong to a different thing, varying in sizes, shapes and colors. Some babies, some adults, some fangs. Some healthy and new, and some rotten and old from age. They form into a long white smile. She wears more than the average person, and the edges continue almost infinitely into the darkness and rotate like two carousels turning in opposite direction, like she's displaying her treasures. Her eyes have no lids and are yellow and bloodshot. The only thing darker than her and him is the pupils that sit in the center of the eyes. She's a nightmare's nightmare, and now I've had the misfortune of being one of the few to see her. I heard what sounded like a screech mixed with a roar and turned back to the right where the Wendigo was running to. Somehow, she was already there, even though I was just looking at her to my left. She was in front of the Wendigo and had her fingers digging into its back and pulling it towards her. The Wendigo tried with all its might to pull back, but even with the strength of being able to rip apart a tank with its bare hands, it was still no match for her. It screamed and roared in a feeble attempt to fight back, but the only resistance it was putting was her letting it know how weak it was in comparison. I watched in terror as she had enough of her game and pulled in her meal. Her eyes locked on her prize, and even being made of shadows, she still dug her long black fingers into the Wendigo's back. Her long arms slowly reeled in her catch, and all the once feared monster could do is scream. It tried with all of its might and will to run away. I watched her ever so slowly pull in the terrified creature. I felt sorry for it. She took its left leg and pressed it into her chest, and the Wendigo was immediately consumed into the void. She slowly pulled the creature into her body, and the monster screamed louder. I heard Wendigos can't feel pain, but whatever she was doing was far past whatever pain was. She pulled more and more of the creature into herself and rolled her eyes up and the head slightly tilted back as if she was thoroughly enjoying her meal. The poor thing reached out to me, and even with barely any features left, I can see it begging and pleading for my help in its face. I couldn't help, but I whispered, "I'm sorry." I watched as her hand covered the beast's face and smothered its screaming head into her body. The Wendigo's right arm that was still reaching out fell limp after its head was consumed. I watched as the last remaining limb of the now defeated beast faded into the darkest black. Her was still looking up, savoring her meal. The shadows are him and her's room, and all she did was apply Rule 4 for her and him, and all the shadows in their room. She snapped back downwards and focused on me. I immediately covered my face and shut my eyes as hard as I could, sitting on the floor in the hallway in the fetal position. I noticed I can still see her face even with my eyes closed. The shadows are her room, and my eyelids are no exception. I opened my eyes immediately at this realization, but looking around in the lights, they were all gone. The Wendigo, him, and thankfully her. I took a second to gather myself and proceed back to my room. I'm going to stay inside for a few days after this incident. My room is safe. However, I've seen what else lives in this complex. Him and her are nothing compared to some of the others who live here, and even if they weren't the top of the food chain, they are but ants to Winthrop and the Pandemonium Complex. Part 2. The Host. The complex that I'm currently residing in is exactly that, complex to say the least. There's rules to follow and more lessons to be learned than there are stars in the night sky. 1. A tenant must never kill or fatally harm another tenant willingly. 2. Nothing may leave, but all can enter. 3. Your room is safe. 4. Rule 1 is void when in another's room, but only to the room's tenant. 5. Damaging the complex or its property purposely is strictly forbidden. I'd do anything to be able to feel outside once again. This place and the thing that runs it is a warden and a caretaker depending on how you treat them. I've been doing good and my room has been getting some upgrades after I lost everything when I disrespected this place. I finally have a mattress again, and even some of the cracks in my ceiling and wood in my floorboards have been fixed while I was asleep. Small progress, but progress at least. The laptop I was given is the only thing keeping me sane right now, and I think it was only provided to warn others. But I think there is a problem. I've noticed that there was a small black spider, no bigger than my pinky nail, with only 7 legs in my room that was watching me. I know this sounds crazy, but I woke up on the floor like normal a few weeks ago, and on the floor was a small spider. It wasn't moving and was about a foot or two away from my face, just watching me. When I started to get up, it scurried away under the broken floorboard and disappeared. I don't have arachnophobia or anything, but if it belongs to what I think it belongs to, then I may be in trouble. As crappy as this room is right now, the door is completely sealed. No room for even the wind to get in. When the rules say your room is safe, they meant it. It must have either followed me in or wasn't my person when I came inside from before. The next day I first saw it, I woke up to it again. A little closer, and once again it hit in the floor when I woke up. So, after a couple of hours, I came up with an idea. I went to my front door and slept as close to it as I possibly could. I laid there for a little over an hour with my eyes closed and pretending to be asleep. Just like before, I woke up to it watching me again, and almost the same distance away as last time. As predicted, it hit inside the floor again. I got up and opened my front door and tossed my shoes outside to simulate walking out. As softly as I could, I stepped far over when it had crawled into and laid down eye level with the floor. I swallowed my breath and held it. I luckily can hold my breath for a long time since I loved swimming as a kid. Very slowly and cautiously, I watched a small spider crawl out of the floor, facing the door that I allegedly left out of. Once it was fully out and watching the door as it crawled slowly, I waited until it was above a solid holeless spot. I quickly slapped my hand with a cup palm over my tiny intruder and captured it. Due to Rule 4, I know I could have killed it since it intruded into my room and that it couldn't harm me due to Rule 1 and 3. But I never liked killing pests, even if they meant harm to me. Although it could just be a normal small independent spider, nothing living in this complex, no matter how big or small, will ever have the courage to break one of Winthrop's laws. As tight as I could, I cut my hands together as delicately as possible. I trapped my new guest in my palms. I awkwardly used my elbows to open my door while holding the spider hostage in my hands. It took a few tries, but I eventually got my door open. I walked a good distance away from my room before walking up to one of the ancient cheesy gold-framed hallway paintings that decorated the pathways. I cautiously released the spider onto the painting, and after hesitating slightly, it slowly crawled onto the decor and turned to face me. I told her to be more careful the next time and to have a good day, my friend. Being alone in this place long enough will have you talking to anything that won't harm you. I was just glad to be able to speak out loud for once. It's been weeks since I even heard my own voice. The small 7-legged spider watched me gather my shoes and retreat back into my room. As weird as it sounds, I missed the company already, but not if she belonged to the host. I've seen the host a few times throughout the complex, but the host isn't always the same host, if that makes sense. You see, the host isn't just one being like him and her, but more like a collective hive. Whenever the host makes a new host, it will look a little different at first, since it's fresh. But after a while, they look like the Crypt Keeper from Tales of the Crypt, covered in small black spiders, small holes, and egg sacs. The spiders have a united hive mind and separate individually to spy. That's how they find weak prey. I had the misfortune of seeing this in the lobby of all places a little over a month ago. A place I thought was safe since we were in the presence of Winthrop. I was sitting in the lounge area, reading one of the old books that are provided for minor entertainment and enjoying the company of the gay ape-like humanoid couple that I met. Jim is a big dark brown ape man, and John is a greyish-white cryptid. And yes, I asked, ape man and cryptid are their pronouns. They spoke 3 languages each. Luckily, they both knew English very well. Really smart and nice guys, but never called them Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Turns out that those are racial slurs. Jim was patient enough to explain how offensive those terms are, but not until after John hit me across the lobby a few days prior in a blind rage after I accidentally whispered those terms out loud in awe at them. Turns out they also have amazing hearing. We've been cool ever since though. We were peacefully enjoying each other's company in the lobby, reading, when suddenly the peace was broken by a single loud scream. Just slightly off the center of the lobby, the host had what looked like a powerless pure white-skinned elf girl pinned down. It had her wrists and ankles anchored down, but not enough to harm her, and this zombie-looking creature held her in place. This caught the attention of everything in the lobby. She screamed and pleaded in a language I didn't understand and kept looking towards the concierge desk where Winthrop was reading the paper and giving the commotion no mind. The bellhop in the straw hat that we know as a god in this place just kept reading its newspaper and leaning back in its wooden desk chair while everything else watched. Once the poor girl realized that not it or anything was going to help, she turned back to her captor and struggled with all of her might. No one and nothing wanted to intervene as to not accidentally break Rule 1. We all watched as the host opened its mouth and what I thought was a long wild bubbled tongue was actually a giant spider egg sac. It moves around like a worm looking for dirt. The poor girl screamed and cried in horror, and when her mouth was wide, it dropped. The giant egg sac wriggled and crawled into her mouth and forced its way down her throat. After the deal was done, the host released her. She ran away crying, and the host just got up and limped away like nothing happened. I asked Jim and John what the hell that was all about, and they explained what the host was. The host is a collective of tens of thousands of small black spiders. Their room is the host. They explained that the girl is doomed. That egg sac that was its tongue is covered in venom that will numb her nerves immediately, making her immune to all feelings. Even if her mouth was shut, that egg sac that was looting that venom would have just gone into her nose, ears, or eyes. The eggs are tiny at first, small enough to get into your tightly shut eyelids and past your eyes. It makes the process painless, but that's just the beginning. Even if only 1 or 2 got in, the job still would have been done. It would only make the process longer. When those eggs hatch, the babies will slowly eat her from the inside out, but she'll never feel it or anything ever again. They'll replace everything they eat with their web and their fluids with that venom so as to not damage their new home. Those spiders are omnivores and will eat her down to the bone. Her body will rot, but will be held together with webs, and after a while, they will be able to control her every movement with those webs. She'll become trapped in her own living corpse and unable to feel or move anymore, like a living puppet. They only do this when the old home is fully decayed and with no more nutrients. They leave as much of your brain intact as possible and they'll force feed you, using your own body as a puppet, or use the holes your body is covered in as tunnels to carry anything you need inside you. When they are done, they will just let whatever is left of you die on its own of dehydration, so they technically didn't kill you either. Since this is the process, they didn't break any rules, so now she will wait and will never know when the conversion is fully done. She will beg for death, but you know Winthrop will not let it come until they're done with her. Even the Deaths and Reapers know better to answer her calls, or else they break Winthrop's laws. I didn't want to hang out in the lobby anymore after that, as much as I do miss Jim and John. I still see them in passing, but it's been a while now. Yesterday, I ran out of food and had to make a trip to Don's Market, a room in the hotel that has a faded red and blue open sign where the room number should be. A Costco-sized market filled with almost any food imaginable that shifts constantly and run by one man named Don, who is a Nephilim. It usually only appears nearby when your room's food supply is almost or completely gone. That room is a whole other story for another day. I was on my way back to my room. Both hands had bags full of groceries. I was looking over to my goods when I exited, and you're unable to go back inside once you have the supplies. The door shut, and in my moment of distraction, I looked up and realized I was in between the now sealed door and the host. It was just a foot or two away from me. The once beautiful white-skinned elf girl from a few weeks ago is now only recognizable by the branded body tattoos on her body. She was bald, but the spiders gave her a head full of long grey webs for hair. Her galaxy-colored eyes are now an open pocket, and the other a giant egg sac going from its left eye to ear. Her body is covered in open holes for the spiders to easily exit her insides, and they were running around all over her like a busy New York sidewalk. I was looking into a decade-old dried-up corpse. Her jaw hung loosely open and only being held on by old flesh and webs. I can see a new tongue egg sac that wiggles around impatiently for a new host inside. Inside, where the right eye used to be, was a small black shine that moved slightly. I was frozen in fear and didn't realize it was now just a little over a foot away from my face. I was trapped. What I thought was the remnants of her left eye began to come forward into the light. Out of its open eye socket emerged a golf ball-sized spider. If the host was a Hive-Life collective, then maybe this was the queen and or her mother. Once the spider had crawled out more, that's when I noticed it had only 7 legs. We stared at each other for a minute, and then, in a raspy voice from the host's mouth came, "Friend." The decaying air that escaped made me almost puke. Pops and cracks were audible as the host controlled their new home and began limping into Don's Market past me. If not for a small act of kindness, I might have become the new host. But it seems maybe I've made a new friend, for now at least. I can't wait to tell Jim and John about this when I see them the next time. But I think I've had enough for now. I think I'm going to stay in my room again for a while. I know better than to get too comfortable in the Pandemonium Complex. Part 3. The Rooms. It's been a couple months now that I've been trapped in this complex. The rules here are simple and few, but there's a lot more lessons here than anything else. Countless unspoken knowledge of this place and its residents. One of the few lessons that I have learned is that a lot of things in here have almost a polar opposite or even an equal. Winthrop and the complex, him and her, and the elevator and the stairs to list a few. I've noticed that my room moves from time to time. At first it was simple. Room 224, second floor, 12th door on the right when I first got here. Days later it was further down, and a few days later after that it was on the left side. Rooms near mine that match the number sequence have changed from mixing and adding numbers to also adding letters. And now sometimes display a text I can't comprehend, or something else after the complex got comfortable with me. I've also learned that the elevator seems to be friendly. It will always bring you to the floor where your room is, despite it traveling around. The buttons in the elevator sometimes change from a standard elevator panel to displaying my unknown neighbor's gibberish languages, or even changing control panels entirely. The elevator's interior is caged in a gold metal framework, with a red and gold intertwining pattern carpet to match the hotel hallways that never change. However, no matter what button you press, it will always bring you to the floor your room is on. I noticed this when I accidentally pressed floor 20 instead of 22, when my room decided to ascend 20 floors up after a couple weeks in. Yet, when the doors opened to my mistaken early floor, I saw my room number just a few doors down to the left. I thought I was mistaken until I entered, and surely enough, it was my room. Back when it housed a normal standard one queen mattress hotel room, before I was punished for my destructive mental breakdown and given an empty trashed room. The stairs, however, were not as kind as the elevator. I made a mistake of taking the stairs once to get in some form of corridor since my entrapment. I knew something was wrong when I noticed on what should have been floor 11 and 12 there weren't even doors. I went up a couple more floors and saw either random locked doors that didn't match or more blank corners. I had enough and turned back to go to floor 1 to just leave. I was already on the bottom floor just after running 2 flights back down. The ground floor's door has also changed into a medieval time door, with interlocking change and a big padlock in the center holding them all together. I began cursing myself. It was at this point that I remembered something Winthrop said when I first checked into this place. I was given 2 keys and a garnet-colored leather book when I first checked into the place. A dirty gold key that was for my room and my room alone, and a bright, shiny new silver key that opens everything else. At first I thought this meant a closet, cabinet, side rooms, or any other door lock in my room. But after a few days I noticed that there weren't any other locks for this other key in my room. I always kept both keys linked on a key reel and on me, just in case. But left the book in my room since it was filled with blank pages anyways. I took out the silver key and went to try it on the padlock, but when I looked up, it was gone. I heard what sounded like a jingle of some kind, echoing down from floors above. I looked up the center gap in between the flight of stairs and saw that they seemingly went up infinitely. I stared up and could barely see what looked like someone looking down at me from about 20 floors up. I suddenly felt my right foot drop a foot or less and looked down to notice there's more floors beneath me now that also descended what looked like infinitely. I heard the jingle again and turned back up and saw whatever was looking down at me is now already a few floors lower. I got a better look at it from this distance. It looked like someone wearing a jester's cap. It leaned back out of sight and peeked out again to look back down like it descended 4 floors in what felt like moments. Its face was loose and saggy, like it was wearing it to pretend to be human. Its makeup is thrown on randomly and dripped down from the Access application. The jingling noise were bells that tipped the head's extensions. I descended the stairs as fast as I could, desperate to find the next door. That's when I heard its laughter. It was deep and loud, like a talking child's toy with dead batteries. I can hear it getting closer and closer as I ran as fast as possible. At one point, the stairs shifted to spiral in reverse pattern to throw me off. A few floors after that, it shifted again to be ascending instead of descending, and I fell face first onto the square cut stone steps. With my face and nose now bleeding, I continued running up the steps on all fours when I saw a big red wooden door and had no time to hesitate. I grasped the handle and turned to see if it was locked, but in the same second I already had the silver key heading for the keyhole with my opposite hand. The stairwell jester was just a floor or two below me now, and I could hear the deep echoing laugh and jingling rounding the stairwells behind me when I finally got the door open. I turned to slam the door in its face. Its limbs were as long as a man on stilts. It had 6 long limbs, each with giant hands that had too many long fingers. It straightened an old clown's costume that seemed to be made for it. I can see now that it is in fact wearing a decrepit human face like a mask, and its real face is too far in to be seen in the dim lights. When I caught my breath to continue on, I noticed that I'm not in what I was expecting to be the hallway of the complex, but what looked like a classic kids' entertainment center. A warehouse-sized building with brightly colored decor and a massive playground for kids that takes up about half of the building and is even connected to the ceiling to maximize the space. Long tables and chairs that can seat several large-sized kids' parties are covered in old moldy pizzas and cakes from being abandoned. The playground had long plastic window tubes and ball pits with trails of what looked like old dried up blood being dragged into them. My suspicions of this were confirmed when I saw the colored carpets had fingernail drag marks following the bloody stains. There were so many drag marks. The plastic air-filled balls in the pit began to shift. Like something breaching the surface of water, the balls parted towards the edge in my direction. Hard plastic slap from something deep inside the giant tubes can also be heard in unison. I began running in the opposite direction towards the revolving door I can see in the distance that looked like an exit. Several carnival-like music played loudly over each other behind me as I tripped over a pulled-up rock. I turned back while getting up to see emerging from the ball pit, exiting the tubes, and some already in full sprint behind me were old, furry children animatronics of different animal and theme variety. Like a zoo from hell itself, they were all pushing and running over each other to get me, each either playing its own music or shouting their own individual catchphrases and slogans. They're covered in dried blood and missing patches of fur from most likely their victims desperately fighting back. I began running again towards the revolving door in the distance. If it wasn't for their personal greed, one of them would have easily caught me due to their colossal size. The revolving door's windows were replaced with mirrors, and I could see they weren't far behind me in the reflection. I looked around quickly to find the lock. The horde was gaining fast on me. A giant, dark brown animatronic beaver reached me first and desperately tried jumping hard at me. Its big head and arm got wedged in the door's frame. I saw the keyhole in the center of the revolving door and turned my key inside of it, but the beaver's big mechanical head and arm were stopping me from turning my exit. I tried kicking its face away, aiming for the big cold dead plastic's eyes, and in my panic I missed on my third kick and threw my leg into its open maw stupidly. Its metal buck teeth took the opportunity and bit down hard on my mid-shin. Immediately it shattered my bone in two and it pulled. My calf muscles tried to desperately keep my leg together. I was holding onto the hands on the revolving door tightly when the beaver was violently pulled back by a Goliath-sized green gorilla animatronic and took everything below my right knee with it. They began fighting for it like starving beasts. Luckily, I was leaning back on the revolving door, and when the beaver was pulled away, I fell back and threw my exit. There was no more sound of carnival music or cheesy catchphrases with a murderous spin on them anymore. With no time to waste, I was bleeding out fast and my body was still in shock, so I couldn't feel the pain yet. I took off my shirt and tore it into long bands and tied my thigh as tightly as I could. After the first tight makeshift bandage, I did that 3 more times to try and stop the bleeding as best as I could. That's when I heard a loud snap through the silence nearby and turned to my right. That's when I really noticed my surroundings. I seemed to be deep inside a heavy forested area. Sunlight is blocked by the tall foliage filled with trees, making it dark, but not unseeable. Another snap was heard from behind me, and I saw something lean back behind a tree to hide from my view. I was looking around in panic when I noticed that the revolving door was also gone. I was surrounded by nothing but thick heavy forest and its occupants. Of course, I finally escaped the complex, and I die by being handicapped in a predator-filled forest. I gave up and yelled for whatever was out there to come get me. There's no way I can win or get out of this. My screams were a mix of impatience, sadness, and anger. I just wanted this to be finally over. In the distance in front of me, I can see a figure with glowing white eyes, like that of a cat's eyes reflecting light. I turned up my wrist and hung my head low to just get this over with, when suddenly I got asked if I'm okay. I confusingly asked what and looked up. There in front of me was a small man, wearing a long fur and leather trench coat and a cornucopia on his head. The man had tired sunken circles around his eyes and was pale from the lack of sunlight. I was stunned at the sighting of another person, even if it was some wacko hermit. I rambled on like a madman about what I just went through in subs. The stairwell, the clown man, the bloody playroom, me losing my leg, and the complex I just escaped from. The man then stopped and corrected me. I was still in the Pandemonium Complex. This was a tenant and I was in his room. A part of me died again almost as soon as I saw hope. I told the thing to just kill me. I was in his room after all. I give up. He reached inside of his coat and started pulling out whatever he was going to use to end me. I closed my eyes and held my head down again in defeat. He held something in front of my face and told me to eat it. It looked like an old dried up orange and a purple striped pepper. Whatever this was, I didn't care anymore. Anything to just end me and my misery. I ate the strange fruit and my right thigh burned with intense pain. My right thigh got twice as thick and popped the bandages right off from the force. I held my prized pumpkin-sized thigh in pain and something shot out. I screamed and cursed the thing that was torturing me, only for me to suddenly realize that I can wiggle my right toes again. I looked down and saw a mucus-covered leg that matched my old leg perfectly. My face was no longer cut and bruised. I looked back up at the tenant and thanked him. He told me it was a gourd-tabe fruit. He's had it for a few years and was saving it for emergencies since it's extremely rare. It can heal, and luckily humans are extremely simple in biology compared to his kind. The man introduced himself as Gunter. He was a fae, an Okras to be exact, but he was rejected by his kind. Humans believe Okras to be a single good fae, but they're actually a type of fae that control fertility, turnips, beans, peas, cabbage, flax, and hemp. Gunter, however, controls the woods and summons fruit. I asked him if that's why he was casted out, and he corrected me and explained it was because he summoned a chant-free fruit by accident and left it in a field. A fire fruit that burst into flames when rotten and accidentally burned down half the forest. He can summon all fruits, but can't control which one he summons. It's random, but luckily he has knowledge of all the fruits and knows which ones are safe to eat. After testing my new leg and standing up, I thanked him for his kindness again and asked where the exit was. He stopped me and told me nothing is free to the Fae and he needs my help in return for healing my leg and eating his extremely rare fruit. Of course, I should have known. Gunter has actually been trapped in his own room for many years. At first, his room was an open field with a few trees, but the complex gave him a packed forest over the years and accidentally turned his room's door into one of the trees. Creating a new door isn't the problem. Gunter controls wood and can just make a new door. No matter how many times he tries though, the door is always locked. When he first arrived in the complex, Winthrop gave him two things. A travel box full of assorted toothpicks with different types of wood and a key made of an unknown dead vine. I asked to see his key and it was the size of a grown man's hand. It was woven together in dead vines and didn't resemble the key in the slightest, but was told it was. Even Gunter said he doesn't know what this vine is or anyone he's ever asked when he was free. It never even worked on his room's door, so he always left it unlocked and barely anything in the complex is stupid enough to enter another's room willingly. Gunter also said leaving your door unlocked can stop it from moving around the complex widely, which is a big plus. I told him about my silver key and how I got here. I then asked him to turn one of those 3 into a door so that we could leave. He refused and said he can control wood, but will never harm a living thing. How would you feel if someone who controls flesh and blood turns you into a door? He explained. I apologized for any offense and asked him what we should do. He pulled out a box of toothpicks and before my eyes took one and kept pulling on it, pulling and shaping it over and over like it was clay, until before us was a red oak colored door with a frame and vine patterns. I was in awe and told him that was amazing. He blushed a little at my compliment and unconvincingly told me to stop. I put my key inside and turned. We opened the door and stepped forward confidently towards our freedom. What we stepped into though was nothing but complete darkness. The room we stepped inside was almost fully black, skies darker than anything I've ever seen before, like Vanta black. A night sky with 2 yellowish moons and stars spaced out in varying shapes and shines, but nothing illuminated below them. We looked around, but all we could see was the light coming from Gunther's room behind us, illuminating our backs. Then, suddenly, complete darkness. Just like the revolving door in Gunther's room, our exit was gone. As we turned around, a blue rippling wave flowed away from our steps. The little light from Gunther's room must have hidden us when we stepped in. The floor had about half an inch of this liquid that held some kind of bioluminescent algae. Every step made a small wave and lit the floor around us with bright blue. Gunther giggled at this beauty and danced in the lit up water. He lightly tapped in love for just a moment of happiness before I put my hand on his shoulder and quietly told him to stop. We were not alone. The waves kept flowing away from us into an endless void, and in the distance were figures also standing in the shallow waters. The blue light wave continues, and with it, more and more differently shaped figures become visible by the light. Some tall, some short, some humanoids, and some creatures I've never seen before. They all stood motionless, looking up into the night sky. More and more became visible. Features were still unknown due to the darkness, but outlines of the things were displayed by the bioluminescence. When the second round of waves hit their feet, they twitched. Then, on the third, they moved slightly. The fourth caught our full attention. One seemed familiar to me, and I hoped I was wrong. "We need to leave," I told Gunther. "Make another door, now." The waves as Gunther's stance from earlier displayed a familiar figure in the distance. A tall white skin reflected the light more than the rest. An apex predator with rotten features, few thinning long hairs and big clouded eyes with no eyelids. That's when I looked up and noticed. Those moons are cracked with red, and the few stars begin moving in unison towards each other into place under the moons. Waves of the bioluminescence water flow towards us. The creatures in the distance began their approach. The familiar figure is exactly what I thought it was, a Wendigo, and a familiar one at that. I screamed at Gunther to hurry and make another door. He was already pulling and forming one as we spoke. I looked up into the sky and stars formed their place while the moons began to turn towards each other. Looking closer, I noticed the stars in the skies were actually teeth, all from a different thing. The moons had big spots of black that were turning completely around, blacker than anything I've ever seen before, but I have seen this before. The teeth formed into a familiar smile that almost went on forever, and the sky looked down at us. We were inside her room. We were inside of her. Her victims were slow at first and started getting faster towards our direction till they were charging at us. The floor was bright with blue light as her army stampeded toward her trespassers. Gunther yells, "Done!" I turned towards our exit and put my key in and turned. We jumped through, not knowing where we were going, but anywhere is better than here. Gunther barely slammed the door behind us in time. We were completely submerged in deep fresh water. We held our breaths and the water was so clear that we were able to look around easily. Once again, no door in sight, but we were somehow in what looked like a deep ocean. I know better than to think that though. Gunther swims towards me and gets close. He pulls out another toothpick and starts his craft again. This time, he makes a small boat and we both hold on as we begin to rise. We both look down and see something massive and long below in the depths, deep enough to not be fully illuminated by the light, but massive enough to look like it was a giant sea creature just a few feet away. We breached the surface and both of us gasped for air. We turned the boat over and got on. "Gotta love Cedar," Gunther chests. Gunther rubs his bald head and then suddenly starts looking around the boat desperately for something. He reaches out from the water and yells, "Aha!" holding up his cornucopia and slops it back on his bald pale head with a satisfied big smile. We look around at the seemingly endless ocean. "How big are these goddamn rooms?" I yell. Turns out, some of these rooms can be on a planetary scale for some of its tenants, Gunther explains. I ask Gunther if he knows where we were, and he says he thinks he knows his tenant. A kraken named... He then made a series of clicks and screeches. Apparently, a kraken is a massive squid octopus hybrid that has the body of an octopus but the head of a squid, giving them 16 to 18 limbs in total. It can be the size of an island if it wanted to, or as small as the wolf-eye octopus. They can fly as well as they can swim, but prefer the cold dark depths. They can communicate telepathically, but if it does while it's too big, it can scramble a basic brain. The one he knows is nice by nature and would maybe help us to get home. The artificial ocean we were floating on was as calm as a glass of water, and the only waves emanated were from our boat. Gunther looked over the boat and into the depths while I scanned the surface. I saw a human-shaped figure that was far out, but close enough to make out some features if I squinted. "Is that?" I whisper. This caught Gunther's attention. "That's Winthrop! Unmistakable, straw boat and head in the hull." I yell out to him again and again while waving. He must be here to take us back to the complex. Why else would he be here, I thought. It was Gunther this time to put my hand on my shoulder and quietly tell me to stop. He was wrong. This wasn't the Kraken's room like Gunther originally thought. Not Winthrop started to get closer and fast, but something big was behind him. Something massive that was breaching the ocean-sized water was right behind the fake bellhop. Gunther began frantically patting his pockets, saying no, no, no over and over again. I watched as the Titan got closer and became more visible as it surfaced. A long stem that matched the blue of the sky and ocean was connected to the doppelganger god that bent far and back into the water. I yelled at Gunnar to make another door, but he yelled, saying he lost his picks. I looked back, and breaching the water was what looked like a colossal anglerfish with an eel body that was impossibly long. Massive, long, sharp, translucent teeth the size of steel beams filled its mouth. Its head emerged with many lures that each resembled someone I loved in the past. "What the hell is that?" I screamed. "A leviathan," Gunther answers. I looked down into the water below us and saw Gunther's picks floating around away from the boat. I moved as quickly as I could, fishing them out and holding one behind me, using my other hand to fish out as many others as I could. Gunther grabs the one I held behind me and works his magic, while I desperately grab any within reach. Waves from the behemoth tenant reached the boat and started pulling the picks away from me. I leaned out to grab more fast while Gunther leaned his back on his side to balance the boat. Gunther used two of his feet to hold onto my new right foot's ankles so I didn't fall in, all the while forming our escape. I looked up and couldn't see anything beyond the giant maw of the beast in the water. Its huge, ripped throat had more rows of teeth going in like a funnel of death, like a mega-mouth shark. The boat shifted hard and I looked back to see that Gunther finished. He threw the door in the water and already jumped onto it. I braced myself and jumped, but didn't take the waves into account and fell deep into the tenant's watery domain. I looked back again like a fool, only to see we were pretty much already in a giant's mouth. I looked down into the depths below and saw teeth rising fast. Suddenly, I'm pulled up with ease out of the water and onto the door by Gunther. He slaps me hard and yells, "Hurry!" I pull out my key and shove it into the door's lock. I turn the lock and knob simultaneously and we suddenly fall through. As we fall, gravity shifts towards the new floor and I land hard on my face while Gunther luckily lands hard on his back. We both groan in pain and begin to laugh at our great escape. Gunther asks how many pigs did I save and I give him the small handful. Not much, I regretfully say. Then we analyze our new surroundings. We were just on the side of a stone-cut pathway just next to a long staircase. Surrounding us were bright pink and white cherry blossom trees with red spider lilies on the floor. One side of the pathway extended to a black stone wall. The other goes up the staircase to a red torii. Gunther was in awe when I jokingly asked if we fell into an anime. Of course, he didn't understand the joke. What a waste. I asked if he knew where we were this time. Gunther had no idea. "Do you hear that?" Gunther asked quietly. I listened and at first I heard nothing, but then it slowly became louder and I was able to hear it. It sounded like a fast drum roll, but with more than one drummer. It became louder and louder. It was coming from up the steps. We looked up towards the torii. A gigantic semi-truck no mask emerged from the top and looked down at us. We froze in fear, knowing that as fast as that thing emerged, there was no way we could run or make another door in time before it caught us. Gunther broke the silence first after a minute with a light hello and wave. The no mask went around the torii in an instant and down the 3-story tall flights of stairs in a matter of seconds. We now see what was making that sound from earlier. This thing's body was long and with countless legs of an insect. Its body was a gigantic centipede and moved with the ease of a natural-born predator. It eclipsed us in its shadow and stared down at us in silence for a minute. It asked in a loud female whisper, "Why are you here?" I answered and explained it was by accident and that we didn't mean to intrude. Gunther apologized too and told her we were lost and asked if she'd show us the way out. The tenant looked towards the blank stone wall on the path behind us and explained that she was sealed inside a room by another rival tenant during their petty squabble years ago. Turns out you can't break rule 5 if you just make something disappear. Can't damage what's not there. She can't leave even if she wanted to, and neither shall we. She then asked if we brought tribute. I can see the mandibles inside the mask's mouth drooling with hunger. The bulging veins from the giant porcelain mask connect to the insect's exoskeleton, pulsating with anticipation. She's getting impatient for us to say that we don't have an offering. She's an omukade and demands something in return for allowing us to breathe in their presence, or our souls will be forfeit. Gunther started patting down his person and pulled out a red pear-shaped fruit with white swirls from the left side of his coat. He said no and tossed it back, reached into the other side and pulled out a black watermelon with orange spots and set it down gently. "Definitely not," he states with a yeesh facial expression. The omukade and I watched him patiently do this a couple of times with so many different kinds of fruit that I've never seen before. One looked like it was made from water and another exploded into small pits like a grenade when it hit the ground far behind us. He began pulling from the cornupica and on the 19th try pulled out a bundle of banana-looking fruit that were brown and shriveled like they were old and rotten. Each had 3 red spots that formed into different facial expressions. "Perfect," said Gunther with satisfaction. The omukade's eyes became wide and she lunged towards Gunther. Gunther barely pulled back in time and the no-mask mouth cracked and split wide open, revealing a massive fanged mouth as she ate the bundle of fruit in one bite. A loud audible gulp was heard from inside her and her neck got wide. The mess inside her traveled downwards, deeper and deeper, and her exoskeleton popped when the mask passed. It looked like a snake eating a big round meal. She let out a sigh and said that it was satisfactory. I asked Gunther what that was and he said I'm better off not knowing. The now full omukade seemed a lot more patient and asked how we got here, since entering or leaving is impossible. We introduced ourselves and asked for her name. She explained omukades don't have names and if we wish to give her one we may. The way she looked when she ate the fruit reminded me of one of my favorite fighters from a 2D fighting game I used to play. I named her Mila. Hard to tell, but I think she liked the name. I let Gunter do the talking, and he explained everything from finding me to now in detail. I tagged in after and explained everything before that. Mila explained that I'm lucky that the stairs only released one minor creature and that I even had the means to escape. Mila then asked to see our keys since she has knowledge of most of the artifacts that don't predate her, and we showed them to her. She analyzed them and told Gunter first that she's never seen his kind of key before and that it must be older than ancient. He then sadly put his key away. Mine, however, she recognized as a reforged unstable skeleton key that has been reshaped into a common silver house key, to put it simply. She explained that my key opens all doors, but what's on the other side is random. For example, if I use this key even on my own room's door, my room will never be on the other side. Perfect for a quick escape, but you don't know if wherever you go next may be worse. There's a shrine at the top of her room that has a door. We could use it instead of using another toothpick, but we'd just be gambling again. She also asked to look at a golden room key that was also on the keyring. She stared for a while and stated that it seemed like a normal house key, but there's something else that basic eyes can't see. Gunter stared at it too for a while and agreed that there's like some kind of humming coming from it. They asked about its origin, and when I told them then Winthrop gave them to me, they asked what were his instructions word for word. Do not abbreviate. The gold key was for my room and my room alone, and the silver key can open everything else. That's it. They both stared at me. Humans either read too far into things or not far enough. Barely ever do we get a complete understanding from verbal communication. They didn't say a word. Mila turned and proceeded up the steps, and Gunter slapped me across the head before following behind her. I asked him constantly what happened while following them. We got to Mila's rundown shrine, and they told me to use the gold key on the sliding door instead of the silver. I told them it won't work on any door but mine. I paused for a minute. I'm an idiot, I whispered out loud. I put the key in, unlocked my door, and entered into my room. My mattress had cheap sheets and a bed frame now. My laptop sat next to my gifted book on a basic wooden desk and with a matching wooden chair rested beneath. I invited my two guests to enter with me. Mila shrunk her size to enter. Gunter was in awe at my room when he entered next. Your room sucks, Gunter states loudly while Mila agrees. We finally were free and I was home, but this makes me wonder. My book and Gunter's key are still a mystery, and I doubt Winthrop will give us any answers. I've made 2 new friends and learned a few more lessons, but I know this is just the beginning. We still know almost nothing about our mysterious gifts, our god Winthrop and his playground, the Pandemonium Complex. Part 4: The Decision. I've begun settling my roots in the Pandemonium Complex. If this will be my final stop, then I should make it feel more at home. My memories of the outside world are fading now that I've found a few friendly distractions. Jim and John, the humanoid ape couple, the host that seems to still be untalkative, but led by my 7-legged friend whom I've nicknamed Siet, Gunter, an Akras Fae who likes crashing on my new couch from time to time, and Mila, the size-changing Omokade who doesn't want a room with us and is trying to get back into hers. Gunter's room was simple and just needed to be opened from the inside the complex to summon a new door. With the help of Mila, we gave it a metal frame so it couldn't be turned into another tree again. But I think he is still a bit traumatized from his entrapment, since his excuses to stay with me are shaky at best. Mila's was not as simple. The only way to unseal her room was to kill the tenant who sealed it shut in the first place. She knows the culprit and has been on the hunt throughout the complex to find him. Nidhugger, a northern, wingless earth dragon who rules the dirt and worms. The complex seems to know that a battle is about to ensue. Certain parts of the Pandemonium Complex shift and warp sometimes, and the lobby changes almost every day. The theme, size, and extra amenities change range from big to small daily. Today, the lobby was the size of the Roman Colosseum I visited once as a kid during a school field trip. There was no way to enter below besides the 2 large tunnels that preside below. Gunther ran to get me from my room once he saw this. With haste, we ran past a mix of new doors that filled the hall. Doors with different colors, frames, and styles. One made of stained glass, thick metal, medieval chains, ice wall, and made of colored mist are just some we passed. We arrived and saw spirits, monsters, creatures, and mortals to list a few watch over the edges at the spectacle. Gunther said the last time this happened, it was between an Avatar of Storms versus a Nova Celestial, who humans called Archangel Michael. This was the first time I've ever seen Winthrop not at the concierge desk, as he stood dead center of the arena. The rules state, 1. A tenant must never kill or fatally harm another tenant willingly. But due to Rule 3, Rule 1 is void when in another's room, but only to the room's tenant. It seems a tenant is without a room, and I decided to graciously move her in with another. The squabbles of the room tenants are their business, and their business alone. I've also decided to do some renovations and temporarily moved said room here in the lobby before you. With that said, I shall return to my duties at my desk, Winthrop announces with a big grin to the onlookers and then disappears. Our feet shake with the pounds of something massive below us. A familiar drumroll can be heard in opposite unison. Gunther jumps with glee and eats his cornucopia full of strange fruit like it was popcorn, while tossing one away occasionally. A massive face can be seen from the tunnel in our view. Out from the shadows emerges a giant female no-mask with the body of a centipede that could eclipse a mountain. From right below us came a long lizard-like titan covered in soil and worms. The dragon's rotten skin was missing chunks and was infested with an uncountable amount of worms. Its rotten flesh filled the stands with its stench and made me cover my nose before I could puke. Gunther inhaled hard and sighed, like he found his favorite scented candle. The behemoths didn't hesitate once inside and began their brawl. Like watching a snake fight an eel, once one wrapped around the other, they slipped through and tried vice versa. Mila split her no-mask mouth in two and opened her mandibles to bite the dragon, but he was already ahead of her. They both bit the other's long bodies and ripped chunks from each other. One bite would almost kill anything with their deadly venom, but they're both immune to all venom, Gunther explains. This was a perfect match. Mila has the advantage of size, but Nidhugger is more agile and faster. Mila threw Nidhugger into the wall and almost instantly went to spear him with her Telson, but he leaped off and onto her long body, gnawing his way up her exoskeleton. Mila lunged to bite her enemy in two, but Nidhugger yelled in an ancient language, then suddenly a barrage of grey metallic threads that resembled spiderwebs spewed out of his mouth and covered Mila. Nidhugger is no standard dragon like the Western, and could cast spells of his own with his ancient tongue. Her face and top torso got tangled and stuck to the wall. She struggled hard and tried expanding her size to break free, but only damaged her exoskeleton even more. Mila tried using her Talson again, but Nidhugger wept that and her bottom half down to the ground. She wiggled in her restraints for a bit, but stopped moving and seemingly accepted her fate. Nidhugger crawled up her long body towards her head. We screamed for her to move, fight, do something, but she just laid there like an exhausted moth in a spider web. We watched as Nidhugger opened his maw wider than what we thought possible and engulfed our friend's face. His body shook from the tension of him biting down hard. The no-mask that we once feared but started to laugh, cracked with the exoskeleton that was connected. In a flash, his jaw broke through and decapitated our beloved Mila. Tears began running down my face and I slapped my fist on the railing and hung my head in defeat. I clenched my jaws hard in anger. Gunther shook my arm hard to get my attention and pointed at our friend's corpse. "Look," he whispered in a serious tone. Her insectoid body was hollow and began turning into stone. Nidhugger was in the center of the arena celebrating his victory. He spoke another ancient language and spewed firework upwards to give the spectators a final show. A lump formed in his throat and stopped his triumphant gloating. The mass was slowly getting bigger. Nidhogger's eyes were big and wide. He knew something was wrong. The mass moved into his torso and kept getting bigger. Gunther shakes my arm in excitement at what we were seeing. Nidhogger's body began pulling itself apart at the sudden growth spurt. Pops and stretching sounds filled the Colosseum while stolen worms evacuating their master. Black ooze leaked from his orifices and wounds. When the mighty earth dragon grew at least twice his size, it exploded everywhere. Chunks of the Nidhogger flew everywhere and debris of death reached the bottom floor of the stands. Our Mila was center stage with bright red flashy exoskeleton and a new no mask. Her once feminine mask that resembled a female woman's face is now more of a demon's. It was still tan like human skin, but now had two big horns and tusks with bigger eyes that looked like it can see right into your soul. The crowd went more wild than the previous false victory, and Gunther matched the energy of all the onlookers combined. Mila shrunk back down to the size of a fully grown python and laid motionless on the arena floor. Gunther grabbed a black and white spotted pyramid-shaped fruit he was keeping on the railing from earlier and jumped over the edge and down into the Colosseum. We were at least 600 feet up, and yet he was falling with such ease and grace to our wounded friend while holding his cornucopia down so as not to lose it. I was watching my descending friend when suddenly I felt a tapping on my back. I turned around to see a small old woman who wore what looked like a black wedding dress with a mourning veil. She pulled my collar and forced me to listen closely. "A door with no lock can only be opened with the key, bound with binds of metal seals intertwined. For the boundless wish to be freed. Fate will be your friend and foe, but destiny will know sorrow. The house of Klaus is on the move. For what lies in the depths of the complex is about to be unleashed." She whispers inches away from my face and releases me. I watch as the woman carrying this ominous message turns back into black smoke and soaks into the complex carpet, disappearing as fast as she has appeared. I know better than to ignore any message in this place and repeated what she said in my head to not forget. I heard a heavy thump behind me towards the arena and see that Gunther has returned with Mila wrapped around him, as she eats the fruit that he saved for her out of his hand. He stares at me and his grin fades away. He knows something is wrong and he asked me what happened. Mila stopped eating and both stared at me hard. I know now how Gunther felt just a moment ago when he looked at me, and I ask if they know what any of this means. Gunther gets close and looks deep into my eyes. "The House of Klaus, is that exactly what she said? Are you absolutely sure?" Gunther asks with a tone I've never heard from him before. Mila and her new face are just as locked on as Gunther's. "Yes," I answer them. "And the woman, did she say who she was?" I told them no, but explained her appearance as best as possible. Gunther grabbed my hand and started walking fast down the complex hallway to an unknown destination. I asked what was going on and Gunther explained. Klaus was the first tenant of the Pandemonium Complex and was Winthrop's right-hand man. He's never met him, but heard stories about him and what he can do. He thought he was a myth and just a boogeyman of this complex. Klaus was a tenant that's not bound by the 5th rule of Winthrop and was the enforcer of the complex. Tenants that manipulated the rules so much and made Winthrop look like a fool were hunted down by Klaus. His abilities are unknown, but he was the only tenant that could potentially kill Winthrop. The House of Klaus are the tenants that dedicated their lives to bring him back. Their reasons differ depending on which member you ask, but most thought Klaus brought more order to Complex than Winthrop ever could. It's said that Winthrop feared Klaus and killed him, but we know Winthrop himself can't break Rule 1. No one ever took them seriously. It would be like a cult dedicated to bringing back Santa, and he's been returned to his planet. I asked Gunther where we were going and he says the concierge desk. I pulled my hand away and told him to wait. I asked if he didn't believe Klaus was real, then why are you so scared? Because the woman who told you isn't a member of the House of Klaus. She's Baba Yaga and she has been missing for over a millennia, Gunther answers. I asked if most of the members are unknown, then how does she know she isn't? Sadness covered Gunter's face at this question. She wouldn't, he answers under his breath. I ask Mila what she thinks, and she says in a tired voice, "Just in case Gunter's right, what harm would it be to tell Winthrop?" I told him to hold on and to just give me a minute to think. If Klaus can kill Winthrop, then why we don't just let him out and get out of this place? Mila and Gunter's looks were louder than words. If Klaus is real and comes back, who's to say that he won't clean the house when he takes it over, and why wouldn't he just rule the complex with an iron fist? Gunter replies with the tone of that should have been common knowledge. If there's any chance of us getting out of here, it's this. I'm tired of being trapped and used like a plaything for something that cares so little about us. Hell, Mila almost died today just to have a room to live in and was made into a show to entertain us. He has a point, Mila chimes in. Gunter looked at Mila with an expression of sorry, but said he definitely doesn't think it's a good idea. This is bigger than us, and we should ask the others. Plus, Mila needs to rest. Let's go to bed, and we will meet in my room tomorrow, with Jim, John, and the host to ask them what they think. Gunter agrees and carries Mila to the elevator to find a room. On my way to my room, I saw a black spider crawling along the wall and told it what's going on and to please tell Siet to meet us tomorrow. It stopped, listened, and when I was done, it rushed away to carry my message. Gunter, of course, was the first to arrive wearing an apron. I said, "Nice apron," and he thanked me while my sarcasm went over his head. He went over to my coffee table, started pulling out fruits and cut them up for snacks. A few hours passed and the next to arrive was Siet. She had a new host of what looked like a tall aquatic fish man that was all dried out. It had dark grey fins where ears normally preside and 3 more in the center of its head. Both eyes were hollowed out and its jaw hung open with another new tongue tucked inside. It limped and dropped onto the single desk chair I had. Gunter had several giant melons in the corner with holes poked in for many children. Siet emerged from the host's mouth and the body fell limp as her children left to eat. Jim and John arrived with Mila being carried, wrapped around Jim like Gunter did yesterday. She looked better and her fleshy, red body looked darker and harder than before. Jim and John could barely stand in my room and hunch over to my couch. Gunter took Mila from Jim and let them enjoy the selection of fruit he cut up on the coffee table. The couch sunk in due to their weight, but we all pretended not to notice, out of respect. Gunter fed Mila out of hand like before, so she could save her energy to heal. Once everyone got settled, the meeting began. I told the other 3 what happened yesterday exactly, and caught that Jim and John never heard of Klaus, so Gunter filled them in on what he knows. We let the information sink in and began our debate. Gunter argued that the complex isn't so bad, and even though we're technically prisoners, we were treated with some form of respect and we have no idea what Klaus's plan will be. It's better to deal with the devil we know than the one we don't. I retorted that this could be our only hope of escape, and even though our needs are met, we are prisoners and nothing more. Life here is everything but freedom, and this may be our only hope of seeing the outside world again. Jim's hand rested on John's, and you could tell that this conversation made John extremely uncomfortable. John was the first to chime in and asked if Winthrop is gone in this place, then how do we know he's not listening and that he doesn't already know our plans? Gunter explained that Winthrop isn't omnipresent by choice, and the complex itself can only listen if spoken to directly and out loud due to respect. It's things like this that shows that he's trying to make this place as homey as he possibly can. Jim and John look at each other to have a conversation with expressions that only longtime lovers could have. You could tell that Jim was on my side and John was the reluctant one. John spoke first again and told us that they met inside this place. If it weren't for the complex, they would have never met all those years ago. Jim's race lives deep in the forests of the Amazon, but was the most advanced member of his race and therefore always felt left out. John was the last of his kind and was hunted like the rest in the mountains of Russia. Jim wipes a tear from John's face and caresses him lovingly to calm him down. If we lose this place, then how will we find each other again? John asks with sorrow. Jim tells him he will never stop looking for him if they get separated and will get through anything that gets in their way. John presses his face into Jim's chest while John's holding him tight. I can't be alone again. I can't lose you, John wails into Jim's chest. I decided to give them a moment and ask Syed what she thinks. Gunter was standing next to the host while holding Mila. Mila and Syed exchange high-pitched noises and rolling clicks since she's unable to speak from the host without her thousands of children controlling it. Mila translates for us and tells us Syed is against it and that she knows Klaus is real. When a spider is born into the host, they share experiences and memories with their hive mind so that even if only one survives, the host will always return. She has knowledge of the complex that predates all of us combined. Klaus is real and may not be as powerful as a god, but has the abilities to kill anything that has a consciousness. A god-killing monster that was barely stopped by Winthrop, the complex, and the selected tenants. The host stayed out of it last time, but lost many friends in the complex war. We were the first friends she had in a very long time, and she doesn't want to lose us too. I asked Mila what she thinks. Mila agreed and told us that she loves us and that she's never had the privilege of having friends or a kin before. Mila looked at Syed when mentioning kin and Syed relaxed slightly at the comforting words. However, Mila was forced to battle to the death just to have a resting place and cannot let that slide. Winthrop needs to die, she answers. I take the floor, then we put it to a vote. All in favor of letting the sleeping dog lie. Gunter and John raise their hands slightly, while Syed raises her tiny spider leg. All in favor of taking down a god. Jim and I raise ours, while Mila raises her insectoid leg weakly. We were tied and had to break it. Jim holds John's hands and tells him, we can't stay here forever. What if one day Winthrop decides to throw us into the ring or even worse? Tells us we have to kill each other. He can't live every day guessing what a mad god is feeling. Home is wherever John is and he will always find his home. Jim presses his forehead into John slightly. Trust me, Jim whispers. John relaxes into Jim's forehead to show his trust. Promise? John asks softly. Promise, Jim replies just as softly back. John shakes his head up and down slightly and kisses his lover to seal the promise. Okay, John says out loud with a sniffle. I'm in. The decision has been made. Gunter, Mila, the host, Syed, Jim, John and I are going to find the very first tenant. The god killer and hopefully our way out of here. Klaus. The complex and tenants are beginning to stir. They don't know why, but everything in the complex feels a shift. Something is happening and even Winthrop feels something is amiss. Little did we know that someone was just outside my door and was listening to us the entire time. Our simple decision sent the pulse down into the depths of the complex and a smile forms in the darkness. It's time to kill Winthrop and leave the Pandemonium Complex. Part 5, The Interrogation. It feels like it's already been weeks since Mila was forced to fight to the death. I can't tell time anymore. I just sleep when I need to, with no sense of time. At first, it messed with my head for a while, and I think I went a little insane for a moment. But once you realize that you don't need it because you don't need a schedule anymore, it can make you a lot more focused on the now. Gunter has been staying with Mila and barely stays in his own room anymore. We don't know if she got the previous tenant's room or if she got hers upgraded since she won the battle against Nidhugger, but Mila's room is an entire mountain range. Gunter has been cultivating at the base of the mountains and hence taking care of Mila. He really loved her cherry blossom trees and spider lilies. I stayed with them for a few days and loved it too after a while. Mila chose a cave in the mountains that she said would work best for her recovery. Mia's biology works like a snake in a tank and can grow as big as her surroundings. Due to her limited space and food supply in her room that she was sealed in, she was small compared to her full potential. Her new demon no mask was hard to get used to, but I kind of like it now. It looks pretty badass with the horns and tusks. The human skin color it chose wouldn't be my first choice, however. Her new dark red exoskeleton definitely makes up for that though. She doesn't look anything like the Mila we first met, but we love her no matter how she looks. Pushed to her limit, she could wrap an entire mountain if she wanted to, or be as small as several inches. Gunter as well has impressed me. For a small 5-foot-something man, he's pretty fast and strong. On his own, he can trek up the 7,000-foot mountain to get to Mila and back in a little under an hour. I've gone with him a few times. We trek normally and talk for a few hours, and he'll either carry me with him, which still takes him a few hours, or just do the rest alone. Jim, John, Siad, and their many children visit too. We have meetings to discuss the plan, while the kids play in Gunter's forest that he filled with insects and fruit groves. Gunter also spent a few hours building me a cabin with one of his pigs. It was actually really good, and the furniture that he built is extremely comfortable. We went over some ideas and shared what all of us can do during our meeting. I feel like an average Joe sitting amongst superheroes when I heard what just their species alone can do. Plus, Gunter, Mila, and Jim have some unique talents. When they asked what I can do, I decided to lighten the mood by doing the removable thumb trick. No one thought it was funny, and we wasted almost an hour explaining to Gunter that it wasn't real. He still thinks I can remove my limbs at will, but choose not to. First thing we needed to do was find Baba Yaga. The host hive might know of Klaus and have some memories of him, but we have no idea where he is or if he has a room. Baba Yaga might have some insight, and Gunter thinks she should be our main priority. But I still think there's more to what he's willing to tell us. Gunter says she was never a tenant as far as he knows and knew her way before he lived there. She practices the art of the witches, enchantresses, sorceresses, and necromancers to name a few. She also spends most of her time in her cabin. Her and her cabin are similar to Winthrop and the Complex, as in, wherever it is, she is. If her cabin is somewhere either inside or trapped in the Pandemonium Complex, then maybe we can find it. Gunter knows what the door looks like if they happen to come across it, but Gunter can't just run around the complex wildly. He might catch unwanted attentions, and none of us know how big the place is if we just search everywhere. She had said she can send her children, but it will take an unknown amount of time for them to come back and tell her what every door looked like, and who knows if it's still gonna be there by the time they get there. She does have another idea though. Her hive mind is strong when the spiders are many, but even stronger when there's less. With less, it will be like she can see through every one of her children at once. She definitely hates the idea, but it may be our only one. We gave them the best days of their lives. A few days after that meeting, she had showed up at the cabin Gunter built without the host and with her children riding on her. There looked to be about 500 to 600 left from her thousands. We didn't ask her prior what she had to do, so we carried on with our plan. She had told us she can also connect us to the host hive if we wanted to, so we can at least all instantly communicate with each other. We won't have visuals like her, but we can hear the thoughts immediately like a walkie-talkie. To be honest, I think we all agreed out of respect. She killed her own children for our sake. The least we could do is be there for her. The smallest spiders from her cluster, with long, thin legs, crawled up each of us, and as much as we hated it, we had to let them crawl into our ear canal. We all shuddered hard and tried our best to let them do their job. I can't speak for the others, but imagine a wild tickle in your ear that sounds like wind blowing hard directly in. Suddenly, an intense pain in my eardrum started making it ring loud and hard. Once the ringing started to fade, I kept hearing a beautiful woman's voice saying hello softly over and over again. I looked over at Siet, who was standing on the dining room table, and asked if that was her. She bounced a little, while I could hear that voice saying happily yes. Even Sean had to comment how beautiful she sounded. Definitely a mother's voice if I ever heard one, which made us hate what we had to make her do so much more. We played around with our new voiceless communication and had to tune it to not hear every thought. I didn't think that would be a problem until all of us could hear John's intrusive thoughts while he was staring at Jim. Ever see a hulking big green ape man turn bright red? It's hilarious, but now I have images in my head that I'm afraid I will never go away. Since Siet is now also without the host, she needs a new spot. We decided to keep her under Gunter's cornupica. We enjoyed our last day of peace, but now we had to start our search. Siet sent out her children, and we listened intently to her kids' updates of anything out of the ordinary. Gunter and Siet focused to show Siet what door they were looking for. So far, no door, but we heard a couple of interesting sightings. The Wisps are back at their pranks again. Little light fairies that can cause visual illusions that have been tricking tenants into entering unlocked rooms. Gulp, the bottomless traveling portal, ate the zombie horde. Thankfully, now I won't get cramped in the elevator again when they were up to 13 zombies. Her was seen consuming that shape-shifting lizard man who loved pretending to be politicians. Grin and Cuba, the giant black bear forest spirits, are fighting in the hallway near Gunter's room because neither would move so the other could pass again. Adrianape, the wife of Apollo who ate his heart, looks like she can finally control her avatar in fire form and is now roaming the hallways. Tate the Warlock is stalking Beta, the techno-organic virus who has a new female host body. Weird little creep. What caught our attention the most though was the new tenant that had entered the lobby. He was a darker skinned man with long dreads that had metal links. He wore a long green coat with his satchel. The big headphones and reflective sunglasses were also a nice touch. Me, Jim and John went to the lobby to see. We are pretty noisy and we might as well kill some time people watching. Us breaking routine and avoiding Winthrop might also cause suspicion. We have people checking in all the time, but this guy was different, as the complex was seemingly treating him as a long-time tenant. The lobby works like a one-way mirror, and with new potential tenants, it hides us and the current theme of the lobby before they get approved. I've only seen it a few times, but when someone new enters, to us they're surrounded by a clear cube that limits what they can see when they're inside. While inside, they can only see what the complex wants them to see, and nothing as far as I know can enter or leave this pocket dimension box. With this man, however, there is no box. The complex didn't feel the need to hide us or his surroundings for some odd reason. He was ignoring it all though, as if he's been here. He even walked right past Agatha and Mrs. Donahue, seemingly two old ladies that are always playing chess in the lobby, and try speaking with anyone in a gentle neighborly tone. You must never speak to them, however. They are a lich and fae, but not nice one like Gunter. The longer you talk to them, the more they ruin and steal your life. I was lucky enough to have Jim and John stop me before I could reply to their hellos. Their friendly faces immediately turned to anger when their meal was not taking the bait. The man paid them no mind and walked right past when they tried waving him down. He was speaking to Winthrop, who was also paying the man special attention. He kept referring to him as they and them when speaking. Winthrop also was standing at full attention before the man walked up. I've never seen him so eager to greet a new potential tenant. When it came down to signing the ledger, he did so without saying a word. But when he finished, Winthrop said all new tenants must sign. We didn't understand at first, when suddenly the man held out his arm and pulled up his sleeve. His arm was covered in a mix of brazen ink tattoos of symbols I've never seen before. His closed right palm began to glow a color I've never seen before and was probably never meant to be seen by human eyes. He opened his palm and a flash bright enough to blind half the lobby engulfed the room. When we looked back after shielding our eyes, there was now a woman with him. She had turquoise-colored skin, long black hair, a beautiful purple collar that had modern accessories, and a satchel bag that matched the man's. She also signed the ledger and was greeted with as much enthusiasm as the man was getting by Winthrop. I asked Jim and John if they knew who or what they were, but they had no idea. I then asked my internal host Yed if she's seeing this. A familiar ring began in my ear and I could hear a voice once again. This had her curiosity immediately when the first words I heard are, "Interesting." Syed has no knowledge of the man, but the woman is theorized to be a jinn and an old one at that. Syed said that physical jinns are extremely rare and are the most powerful kind. But what caught Syed's attention was that she wasn't bound. Jinns are normally adorned with bright jewelry to symbolize that they are bound to the human world and must obey the law of the bound jinns when on the mortal plane. This jinn, however, was somehow free and in full control, which can normally only be done if wished to be free by the master. They also usually leave once freed to return to the realm of the untamed elements, like a fish running back to water. Once checked in, we saw Winthrop provide them with what looked like a metal jewelry box that the man put in his satchel. They started walking towards the elevator when I decided to introduce myself. The man stopped first and raised his brow behind those shades, but the jinn stood between us and signaled me to halt with her outstretched arm. Or at least that's what I thought. I was thrown backwards by an unseen force, but was luckily caught by Jim. John stood in front and began to growl hard in anger. John's size began to increase steadily with his rage, and the air around us began getting hotter. I saw his grey fur begin to tense with his flex of dominance, and I yelled for him to calm down. Jim put me down and rested his hand on John's shoulder. John began to almost instantly relax. Jim stepped in front and apologized, but the woman held her hand back up as a warning to not approach. The man this time relaxed her by resting his hand on the top of her forearm. She looked surprised and shocked by this. The man walked up to Jim and took off his glasses. He looked Jim up and down like he was inspecting him. The man's eyes were a bright mix of blue and green. The man asked what tribe he is from, and Jim answered, "The 13th Wukong of the non-Providence, but has been Omega ranked in the Tower Mari clan for a few decades now." He then looked over to John and asked him. John only replies with Nikito, and both John and the man averted their gaze when the man apologized. The man then looked towards me and apologized for his girlfriend's defensive behavior. We shook hands and greeted each other properly. The man's name was Otto and his girlfriend was Desiree. She still watched me with hard, suspicious looks while he talked. The man asked me what I was. I told him I'm just human. He stared for a while. He then looked me up and down like he did with Jim and asked how long I lived here. I was honest and told him it felt like a few years now, but I have no idea. He then berated me with questions I didn't really understand, like what's my fraction, who's my totem, who did I embody, and when and where's my birthplace. I answered as best I could and was only given looks of suspicion in return. At the end of my interrogation he simply stated, "So, you're a basic mortal human?" I could only reply with an embarrassing yeah. Otto seemed surprised and turned toward Desiree, who gave him an equal amount of confusion. He then bluntly asked, how am I even alive or even sane in this place? I just shrugged and replied honestly, no fucking idea. I've never heard so much laughter since I've been here. Otto, Desiree, Jim and John all teared up from laughter. Otto dabbed me and pulled me in for a hug while still chuckling. It was so weird to have a normal person interaction in such a long time. I then asked about him. He was Otto and then proceeded to give me such a long list of either titles, ranks, and or alignments to the point where we stood there for about 10 minutes before he finished. At heart though, he was human for the most part. He introduced Desiree and told us that they met when she was sealed away in a decanter on a sunken ship that Otto was excavating years ago and have been together ever since. He confirmed that she was a djinn like she had said, and that she was one of the last djinn of origin. One of the most powerful djinns. I only know their kind from the story of Aladdin and asked if that's the kind they meant. I was given looks of confusion and had to explain the story more. There were some similarities, and also that she had to grant him 3 desires for her to be free. But he only did one, her freedom. Odo and Desiree were together for 5 years without him ever making a wish. Instead, he got to know her and enjoyed her company. They fell in love 2 years in, and when they decided to be together forever, he made a choice to make it her choice. He desired for her to be free. Their lives weren't easy, however. They were haunted by men who knew of Desiree and her power. They've been on the run for years and wanted to be with others like themselves. Otto hates humans, and Desiree matched that hatred. I then asked, "Why are you giving me the time of day now?" He just replied with, "You're different." I didn't know if that was an insult or a compliment. I told them I didn't want to hold them up any longer, and it was a pleasure to meet them. They began walking away towards the elevator while Jim and John collaborated their feelings on the couple. I was just happy to finally meet another human here, even if we're clearly not cut from the same cloth. Sian began speaking again in my head and told me we needed to leave the lobby now. She said not to look, but Winthrop has not taken his eyes off us and he doesn't look happy. I told Jim and John that we should go check on Mila so as to not cause any suspicions on our leave. They agreed and gave a slight nod to confirm. We began walking away when Winthrop called out to me and asked me to come over. I told him maybe later and that we were going to check on our friend. I turned to leave only to turn to see Winthrop in front of me. We were somehow sitting in a small room I've never seen before. It looked like the old school interrogation rooms we see in black and white detective movies. This wasn't good. Winthrop had a serious look and looked directly into my soul with those impossibly bright blue eyes. He then lightened up and asked how I'm liking my stay here so far. I told him it was good and then was asked why I'm keeping secrets then. My blood ran cold and I told him everyone has secrets. He laughed and said that was a good answer, but then suddenly switched to bad cop. He slammed his hand in front of me and asked why we have been spying then. Sweat began dripping down my face. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about. He switched to good cop and rubbed my cheek. He asked in a light tone if I think he's stupid. I told him no, and then he grabbed my face to look into his. He told me he doesn't read minds, but he has ways of getting information. He then cupped his hands over my ears and I felt an intense pain with a loud white noise. He held the hair on my head with his opposite hand so I couldn't move and opened his palm before me. The spider he had put in my ear was standing in his palm. He asked again if I think he's stupid. I told him no and the spider began floating. Her leg stretched out and one popped off. He made it so I could hear her scream. I told him to stop and he asked again if I think he's stupid. I yelled no again and he pulled out another from the spider. She was a child and I could hear her cry and scream in pain. He asked a third time and I switched my answer to hopefully get a better result. I said yes and then he set her on fire. A flame that burned but didn't cause fatal harm. A flame of pure pain and torture. Her screams were loud and filled with sadness and confusion. I begged him to stop, but he kept asking that same question over and over until she had no legs left. He then threw the burning legless spider into the corner. Her scream stopped eventually. I knew she was alive, but just broken in mind now. I told him I just wanted to leave and he grinned. Honestly, is that so hard? Those words sent shivers down my spine. I told myself I can't break. He asked what we were doing and I told him that I'm just trying to find a way out. The grin went back to a scowl. He touched his fingertip to mine and my right middle finger he touched began to burn. At first, it dried up slowly and turned black, and then began turning to dust from the tip down to the knuckle. He told me he doesn't like torturing his tenants, he just wants to still live happily and comfortably. Winthrop then asked why I would want to leave. I have nothing out there and he knows that, I replied with a simple fuck you. He sighed in annoyance. I suddenly was completely frozen in place and unable to move. He grabbed my left arm and began twisting. First my wrist snapped, then slowly my forearm began breaking. After that, he pushed my elbow to the opposite side where it's supposed to bend and caused a compound fracture. I was then unfrozen and immediately cried out in pain. Winthrop grabbed the back of my neck so I could sit up straight and squeeze lightly. He told me I knows I'm up to something and to just tell him. If I tell him, all this will be over, but I would be putting my friends in danger worse than this. I answered with, "You're insane." He threw my head forward and it bounced off the table in front of me. I held my face with both hands and realized my arms are normal again. Winthrop then grabbed the back of my head with his open palm. He told me to spill my guts. Before I could say anything, I started projectile vomiting hard. At first, it was what I ate, then bile, blood, and after my organs began coming out of my mouth as I was still even throwing them up. Every organ was ejected out of my mouth and he made sure I could feel it all. Every time I would start passing out from the pain, he'd jerk my head and bring me back. My tongue was next to be forced out, and then my teeth one by one uprooted themselves to join the rest on the table and floor. My skin began to melt off my flesh with my nose and ears. My skeleton from neck down also decided to leave. It moved on its own and forced its way out and through my muscle tissue like it was trapped. Lastly, he made my eyes pop out to view it all. This was nothing compared to when he made it all do it again in reverse and even slower. Did you ever feel a skeleton crawl back into your flesh? I do. He made sure the nerves felt it all and that I wouldn't lose consciousness for even a moment while my body slowly and painfully repairs itself. Once I was fully repaired, he asked again what my friends were doing. I told him it was only me. He sat back in front of me and stared long and hard. I was shaking with fear as to what he was planning to do next. He reached out his index finger, placed it in the center of my forehead and pushed hard. When I turned back up, I was no longer in the interrogation room. I was in my room, my childhood room. I looked down and saw my pajamas I haven't worn since I was 6 years old. I felt wet and warm in my bed and began crying loudly. My parents entered my room to console me and told me I must have just had a nightmare. I tried telling them about the Pandemonium Complex and Winthrop, but was too broken to explain and just babbled on like a crying child I was now. They told me it was okay and that I could sleep in their room that night. A few years went by and the Pandemonium Complex was nothing more than just a memory of a bad dream. When I was 9, I came back from school one day to see my front door was open. I entered slowly and saw that my house was a wreck. Like a tornado or a wild beast came through. I called out to my parents and siblings, but no one answered. I went to the hallway and saw a blood trail leading into each room. I passed my siblings' room first and only saw blood leading to their closets. I was too afraid to open them. I went to my parents' room and saw they were torn apart. Looks of horror were frozen on their faces. I heard something behind me coming from my siblings' room. I ran to my parents' window. I unlocked it and jumped out, leaving my backpack behind. This isn't right. I ran to the neighbor's house and called the police. I lived with my aunt and uncle after that, then my grandparents. All met the same fate as my household. I was placed in foster care at 13. I began questioning my memories and what's happening. None of this seemed right. At 14, I was adopted into an abusive household. My adopted mother only beat and yelled at me. My adopted father was worse and did unspeakable things. I ran away at the age of 16 and was homeless for a year. I then met the love of my life, Tanisha. She was perfect, kind, loving, empathetic, and all around a good person. We were together for 2 years before I met my best friend, Tate. They helped me to get back on track and made my past seem like a bad memory. I was 26 now and was married with 3 loving children. My best friend Tate had a family of his own and we were raising our kids together. Life was perfect. Then, one day, I came home from work. My front door was open and I knew it was over. I entered my home. My children were torn apart and thrown around my living room like ragdolls. I went into our room and saw that it was torn apart, but Tanisha wasn't there. I ran out when I heard a familiar noise coming from the living room. I jumped out my window and started running towards Tate's house. I kept trying to call my wife's phone non-stop. No answer. When I got to Tate's house, I saw that his door was also open. I ran inside to see the same scene happen to his children. I ran into Tate's room and found him and my wife. She must have tried running there when she found our kids, I thought. A small red light caught my attention in the debris. A camera that was recording. I played the tape back to see what happened. My wife was cheating on me with Tate. The camera was filled with different videos from long before today. I started the video from today. To my dismay, they were in the middle of it when screams could be heard from the living room. I was so focused on what was going to happen next that I didn't notice the presence behind me. A scream broke the silence before I could see what entered the room, and I turned to see Sarah, Tate's wife, screaming in horror at me. I tried calming her down and explain, but she had the police behind her already. I was arrested and was found guilty for murder. They thought I killed them all because I found out they were cheating and also pinned the past murders on me, since whatever kept happening is following me. I was thrown into a dark cold prison to live out my days in a hole. My days consisted of starving, being beaten, and cold. I wanted to die. The death sentence was spent since I was a child, so all I could do was wait for death. One day, when I had given up, a few guards entered my room. I won't say what happened, but it ended with them beating me non-stop until I couldn't fight back. They didn't stop beating me, and when I was finally getting my wish of death, I was sitting in a chair. I was in a small room with a man sitting across from me. A small bellhop wearing a straw boat hat. Winthrop. All my memories came flooding back. Memories of the past life and now mixed and formed back into my hellish life. Winthrop asked me again what we were planning. I looked him dead in the eye and just answered, "I will kill you." A grin formed on his face and he leaned in. "How?" he asked plain and simply. I knew I said too much again and just went silent. I don't know how long I was there for. He made me live other hellish lives and torture me over and over again in ways that would make the devil himself want to die. I never said another word. I could tell he was getting frustrated and was losing control. His methods started becoming sloppy and desperate. One of the benefits of being a basic mortal human is that we die very easily, so you could do whatever to us. But in the end, they start getting very similar and I learned to get used to it. Once he realized he wasn't getting anything out of me, he threw me back into my room in the complex. I was thrown hard through the air and saw my furniture fly past me before I hit the wall hard. That's when I just broke and cried for hours. I just needed to release. What I didn't notice was that Gunter was on the couch the whole time. He sat silently and just let me break. I think he knew I just needed to let it all out. I don't know if he knew what I just went through, but he just started getting some fruit ready for me to eat when I'm ready. The small spider crawled out of my sleeve and ran to see it under Gunter's cornupica. I slept for an unknown amount of time, but my body definitely needed it. When I woke up, I ate and Gunther asked me if I wanted to talk. I just asked for how long I had been gone. He said Jim, John and I just left a few minutes before I was suddenly flying from my room out of nowhere. He asked more directly as to what had happened. I didn't give him all the details, but now my mind is set. Winthrop and the Pandemonium Complex need to die. Part 6. Baba Yaga. Tensions have gotten high in the Pandemonium Complex. Winthrop hasn't sat at the concierge desk in days and has been roaming the halls. He's acting casual, but we can tell he's on the prowl. Most of the tenants have locked themselves in their rooms. The few that roam the complex are either powerful enough to hold their own and defend themselves or seem to be helping Winthrop. One that Siet has been informing most about is the Wanderer. He's a massive man draped in dark grey robes and bandages covering his right eye. Something else seems to be reporting to him too. Siet's children say the wind blows in a cold chin and he'll stop and seemingly listen to it before continuing. Siet's child, who was interrogated with me, was reluctant to return to me, but she crawled back into my ear after her mother told her she had to. The pain of the small spider flushing back into my ear felt like nothing compared to what I just went through. Gunther has gone into a meditative state and he and Siet are trying their best to find Baba Yaga and or her door. Jim, John and Mila are waiting in Mila's room for our calls. I have chosen to roam the halls personally, mostly to pass Winthrop on occasion. I make sure to exchange glances to show him my resolve and that he can't scare me like the rest. He always smiles and greets me with the tip of his straw boat hat. There's another problem. Him has been following me, but not like before. In the past, he would stand dominant in the center to show his presence, but I've caught him a few times peeking around corners. I know it's him by the fedora-shaped hat that tops the Shadow Man's head. So far, no her though. A problem I will most likely have to deal with soon. I've also passed Otto and Desiree in the halls too. We exchange pleasantries, but they're still a bit standoffish. They mentioned something seems off about me now, but I didn't want to talk about what I went through after we met. They're still new, and I can tell they either don't know the complex is on high alert, or they don't seem to care. I've also paused the wonder that Siet has been telling me about. Once in passing, I guess I was too close for comfort, and he shoved me hard into the side wall without even looking at me. His one eye stared off ahead, and I was seemingly just an eyesore for him to put aside. Siet was also correcting the cold chill that's flowing through the halls. It surrounded Otto, Desiree and I when we were speaking, and they definitely noticed it too. Desiree snapped her fingers and the wind was blown back through the halls. I think that hinted to them that something was going on. I've also noticed the others that are roaming the halls. Everyone who's roaming seems to be looking at the doors as well. I've been keeping an eye out for the woman who gave me the ominous warning, or a door that looks like it would belong to a cabin. So far, I've seen more unfamiliar doors, but nothing resembling that. The halls of the complex are also beginning to shift more and more. Here, if you round a corner and turn back, you might come across different doors than what you passed before. But now, the doors seem to be changing when you just turn away from them. Halls that seemed long but had an end in sight now stretch infinitely and have cross-section corridors. It's becoming a maze, but I still have my keys, so I can always find my back to my room effortlessly. I've also noticed that him isn't the only one trying to follow me. Some other creatures and beings have tried, but when I sprint and turn down some halls, I can lose them after a while. One that has been on my tail more often than the others is an albino humanoid raptor-looking creature draped in a red hooded robe. His red robe matches the decor of the complex halls, but his pale white skin gives him away when I use my peripheral vision to watch behind me. I keep trying to lose it, but when I do, I keep running into it eventually, and it's back on my tail. I was in the midst of losing it when I ran into Winthrop again. This time, he decided to stop for a chat. He asked me if I'm looking for something, but all I answered back with was a hard glare full of hatred. Winthrop just chuckled back in my face, which pissed me off even more. I can hear Siet's voice saying something in my ear, but my rage is deafening me. You know, I don't think a tenant has ever hated me more than you, Winthrop continues saying. I noticed there's something far behind Winthrop in the halls, but I kept staring into the mad god's eyes. I knew Winthrop knows this too when he slightly peered behind his shoulder. Without looking, I already knew it was him by the darkness he permeated. I barely heard the, well, maybe one, under Winthrop's breath. Siet is yelling something loud in my ear, but I focus all my effort into the opposite ear as to only hear Winthrop. His mocking grin infuriates me to no end. He told me whatever I was planning won't work and that I should just get comfortable. He even fixed up my room to make my broom closet look like a zoo as an apology for our last encounter. He definitely noticed how little I cared, judging by his reaction. A cold chill surrounded us, and I also then noticed him was gone. Someone was coming our way behind Winthrop, but this unfazed him. He continued our chat. I had a very old friend that you remind me of a lot. Not your personality, looks, or even spirit, but your hatred toward me makes you almost identical. I can feel the floors trembling and warm air behind me mixes with the cold breeze. It's in the eyes. Your eyes that can see almost all, but chose to glare at me reminds me so much of... Siet is screaming something and the wind blowing around us is mixing temperatures like crazy. I can see now the being coming up behind Winthrop is the Wanderer. The floor is shaking almost, but I can't help but to focus on the being that ruined my life before me. One word made everything change. Klaus. As the name escaped Winthrop's lips, I tried my best to not react, but I knew it wouldn't matter even if I didn't react. Winthrop's grin slowly became a scowl almost as soon as that name reached my ears. He knows. The floor feels like a small earthquake as the hot and cold winds around us blow hard like a small tornado. The Wanderer walked around Winthrop, but his face finally displayed something I thought was almost impossible before. Concern. I was suddenly pulled backwards hard and felt the familiar softness of green fur. Jim grabbed me and ran away with John. He held me behind, and due to his speed, I was off the floor easily and able to peer behind me. Adrianape blocked their path behind us. Adrianape, from what I heard, was the wife of Apollo. They lived together in the complex, but she always hated the gods of old. Once they moved in here, she found out that the gods of old were nothing but spirits and avatar of the elements. Their power tricked humans into worshipping them and believing they're omnipotent gods, but they were nothing but greedy and bloodthirsty beings. She practiced magic of her own and killed Apollo in his sleep one night and consumed his heart to gain his power. After that, her body was engulfed in flames that she couldn't control. Her body is a constant state of infinite fire that can match the sun itself. The only thing that can match that fire is her hatred towards the old gods. This stems from what they did to her beloved little sister, Medusa. When her gaze met the Wanderers, her screams were high and deafening. The halls were almost consumed entirely in a fire of colors, ranging all over the rainbow. Loud booms and cracks can be heard in the blinding fire-filled halls. Thankfully, Jim and John are fast. We ran and turned down every hall to escape their fire following behind us. Jim swung me to his chest and held me tight as he picked up his speed. I can hear my name being called over and over again. I then focused on Siet's words. I responded and she sounded relieved that I finally snapped back. They found the door. When they were trying to inform me, I was in the midst of listening to Winthrop. When she noticed what I was doing, she sent out Jim and John to get me. That's when she also noticed the Wanderer was approaching and I was being questioned again. Siet knew of Adrianape's hatred and power while she was roaming the halls as well, not too far away. She had John run and punch her as hard as he could to get her attention and chase them. We kept running until the flames could no longer follow us. Siet had one of her children watching the door at all times to make sure it wouldn't disappear or move. Gunther came around the corner and easily matched Jim and John's speed. He had Mila wrapped around him and held his cornucopia down to not lose Syed either. It took us a few minutes to get to where the door was. It was an old dark wood with patches of moss. It was 5 vertical loose planks of slightly different sizes held together by 3 horizontally rusty iron slabs bolted in. We stared for a few seconds before Jim broke the tense silence. Do we just knock or... Gunther walked up with wide eyes and knocked softly. He called out to Baba Yaga and told her it was him in a soft voice. A few seconds passed and we heard what sounded like a ton of locks being unlocked one by one. Gunther turned towards us and awkwardly said, "She likes her privacy." After the last lock sounded, we waited for a few moments for either the unlocking to continue or the door to open. After a moment, Gunther opened the door slowly. He entered first and we followed close behind. Her cabin almost exactly matched the door. Everything was mostly dark mossy wooden furniture and being held together by rusty iron works. Candles of red and black dimly lit the living room. John closed the door behind us and tried his best to lock it back up. We all looked around cautiously while Gunther called out to her. At first, he kept saying Baba Yaga, but then got more shy and said Bobby. Jim, John and I exchanged odd looks and mouthed Bobby to each other in confusion. The floor planks below us started secreting a familiar black smoke that covered the floor at ankle height, but no higher. We all looked around and prepared as best as we could. Mila was the first to notice the black smoke rising behind Gunther, and it was fully formed into Baba Yaga before she could warn him. It was too late. Gunther was barely able to look behind him before a hand swiftly smacked him across the head. Her hits were fast and fierce. Gunther had zero time to react. Blow after blow of light slaps all across his unprotected body, and she yelled in a language I couldn't understand, but in a tone I knew all too well. She was furious, and we couldn't help, as Gunther was on the receiving end of a wife's punishment. Gunther tried pleading with 1,000 sorries, but they fell on deaf ears. John giggled behind us at the spectacle and was met with a thrown shoe to the face from the cabin owner that stopped him in his tracks. Gunther held his hand up in a giving up motion. The woman in the familiar black wedding dress threw her mourning veil back to unveil her face. She was beautiful. This was not the same woman who gave the ominous warning. She wore the same clothes and looked similar, but younger. Her pale skin and sunken eyes matched Gunther's, but she could give Morticia Adams a run for her money. After yelling for a while and cornered our poor Gunther, she stopped and stared hard. She lunged at him, and he braced himself as best as he could. She embraced him hard and held him tight. Gunther looked surprised at first, but then his expression changed to a look of sorrow. I did understand the next few words she said in English. "I found you." Gunther held her tightly back, and we all just stood awkwardly. I saw John wipe a tear away like he was watching a romance movie. Gunther apologized again and kissed her with the passion of a long-lost lover. He explained that he didn't leave her and that he had entered the complex unwillingly and got trapped ever since. She asked how, and he told her that he was looking for herbs that could help her and add to their garden, but found a door in the middle of the wood and walked inside. She stared at him blankly and slapped him across the head again. "You don't enter random doors you just find. You're a fae. That's rule 1 of any fae, you moron," she lectured. We all heard an ow in our heads, and Baba Yaga looked at Gunther's cornucopia confusingly. She removed it to find Syed on Gunther's bald head. She apologized sincerely and extended her hand to Syed. She crawled onto Baba's hand and she kept complimenting how beautiful Syed was. She was sitting there, petting Syed with her pointer finger gently, when Jim let out a very obvious cough to get her attention. She turned and then awkwardly started noticing the others in her living room. She gave a very awkward hello and a wave before obviously whispering to Gunther as to who we are. Gunther apologized for the 1001st time and started introducing us. He started with Syed and Mila, who Baba Yaga seemed to adore, then introduced Jim and John, who were hunched over to fit in the cabin. She then apologized and made a few motions with her unoccupied hand that expanded the room to fit all of us comfortably. Jim and John stood straight up and cracked their backs in relief while thanking her. John and Baba Yaga seemed to be akin to each other as they talked for a while about Jim and their relationship, while she added her 2 cents about Gunter's and hers. She even mentioned how odd it was that their species even found each other, since they descend from different parts of the world. John explained how they met, and Baba Yaga listened with full intent as she seemed to love the story. She then turned towards me, and I gave her a raised hand and hello. Her expression from John and her positive greeting was forcibly held onto not to show her real feelings towards me, but her fallen brows gave it away. She just turned to Gunter and said, "A basic human?" Gunter happily introduced me and told her I'm no basic human, and failed to quietly whisper that I can remove my limbs at will. The sparkle returned to Baba Yaga's face and yelled, "Really?" I did my crappy remove with a thumb trick to show her how stupid Gunter was to believe it, but was only met with his matched astonishment from the couple. Jim and John just held their faces in disappointment, and we all silently agreed to not even bother trying to explain it this time. We asked Baba Yaga how she also ended up in the complex, and she informed us first to call her Bobby. She explains that after Gunter disappeared, she tried looking for him all over the woods, the Fey world and the couple magic realms, but couldn't find him. She's been searching for time, space, realities and realms to find her Gunter, but kept turning up nothing. She then tried using a tracking spell using one of his hairs, and her cabin fused to the Pandemonium Complex. I was first to question, Gunter doesn't have any hair, but then he too enthusiastically starting undoing his pants to argue. We all collectively told him no, never mind, and we got it while Bobby was quietly watching him too intensely. She's been trapped in her cabin for decades before we could even knock. Something about the complex wouldn't let her open the door. We're guessing because she's not a tenant, she couldn't access her door and therefore can't enter nor leave the complex. We sat there for hours catching her up with everything, and she was very insightful. We learned that Winthra might be what she calls a pocket god, a god that is only all-powerful in his own pocket dimension. Which explains his limited ability, and the complex itself is his pocket dimension given sentience to try to make up for the lack of full godly power. We all told her our stories and how we found this place, or how it found us. My story piqued her curiosity when I explained to her my gifts. She asked to see them, and I gave her my keys, but told her I kept a blank red book in my room. She sounded disappointed to hear that I didn't bring the book, and then started inspecting my keys. She remarked how the bind on the gold key is so unique and perfect, but the silver key is like looking into a slot machine that has near infinite combinations. She asked what Winthra said when I was given these. I told her, the gold key was for my room and my room alone, and the silver key can open everything else. She laughed and stated, that's why God should leave the spells to the professionals. She made the key hover between her palms as she waved like she was playing an instrument. An aura glowed from the key in color I've never seen before. Images of transparent keys that looked identical seemed to come from nowhere and fused into my silver key. They started slow and few and became faster and plentiful. She explained a simple word can throw a wrench in any spell and can make it better or worse. It can cause balance and harmony or chaos. Even the tone of a word spoken can affect the results greatly. This was either done intentionally or by accident. I will never know, but the transparent key stopped combining into mine and it began to hum. The silver key can unlock everything else. I asked what the difference was, and she explained that when Winthra said open, it caused the key to open random doors. Her new spell now makes my key unlock everything else, no more randomness. I thanked her and put my key back with the other. We continued explaining to Bobby everything else that's currently happening, and what threw me off is that this all seemed like news to her. I asked her what she meant by what she told me, and she just returned a confused look. She said she's never met or seen me before and that she's been locked in her cabin ever since the convergence. She then asked what she supposedly said. A door with no lock can only be opened with the key, bound with binds of metal seals intertwined. For the boundless wish to be freed. Fate will be your friend and foe, but destiny will know sorrow. The house of Klaus is on the move. For what lies in the depths of the complex is about to be unleashed. I told her what happened after Mila's fight and what she looked like. Bobby explained that she never changes her age like that, and if that's what she looked like, then she must have actually been that old. She mentioned before that she can travel through time, but it's a lot more complicated than that, and she shouldn't have been able to even speak to you with her power. If this was her, then this must really big for her. To 1, be able to do that, and 2, break the rules of time travel to give me that message. She fears the consequences that she'll have to face in the future for doing that. Bobby also mentioned that the first line in her warning is now coming to fruition. I asked what she meant, and she explained that the fact that she just gave my key a new spell means that the first line in her warning will now work. If my key could only open doors, then how could I open a door with no lock? A door with no lock can't be opened since it must be bound with something else. Bound with binds of metal seals intertwined sounds more like a description than anything. I cut her off. A padlock. She said that makes sense, and I told her no, it's not a guess. Everyone stopped thinking and listened as I continued. There's a door that sometimes appears. I never thought too much about it since all the doors in the complex are so unique, but I've seen an old door that is chain shut and in the center holding all the chains together is a padlock. A door with no lock can only be opened with the key, bound with binds of metal seals intertwined. The door itself isn't locked and can't be opened, but it can be unlocked, I yelled excitedly. Bobby then asked where I saw the door last. I thought hard and remembered the stairwell. It appeared before me, but disappeared before I could use my key on it. I wonder if it knew it wouldn't work. The stairwell is dangerous, even for all of us. She had cut me off with a soft no. She knows where it is. We saw it not too long ago. If she's thinking about the same door, then it's waiting for us. I asked her where. She had said she saw it when she was looking for Bobby's door. It's in front of my room's door. She had checked again. It's still there. I told her that's awesome since I have my gold key and we can be there in a few seconds. She had said there's a problem. I told her we'll be so fast that Winthrop and the Wanderer won't even see us. Plus, they're probably still dealing with Adra and Ape. She had said that they're not the problem. Her is standing between our doors. She's staring at my door like she's waiting. I knew this was eventually going to be a problem. Of course, it just so happens to be at the worst time. Bobby asked who her was. We explained her and him as best as we could, and Bobby said that they sounded like manifestations of some sort. Bobby asked if she could tune into the hive mind like us, and Siet said she always keeps 2 kids in her just in case. One crawled from Siet's hidden underbelly, and Bobby put it in her ear. She tuned in with us and meditated like Gunther was. She said him was also watching from down the hall. Her and him are definitely manifestations, but she's never seen ones like those before. She also said something unseen is watching the halls. The wind has eyes. Bobby held Siet to expand her abilities. The Wanderer has a wind chin that he's bound to himself. The Wanderer and Winthrop are also wandering the halls again. Adra and Ape must have been forced back into our room. So much for our distraction. Bobby said she could distract her and him, but she's bound to her cabin still and can't project without her being a tenant. Jim and John said that they have an idea on how to fix that. Winthrop and the Wanderer are closing into my room as well, and we're going to have to move fast. It seems everyone knows what we're up to now, and we don't have much time left anymore. I can't shake the feeling that something isn't right. Wish us luck. We are going to need it. Part 7. Klaus. The next day to our plan wasn't exactly what I was expecting. We held a wedding in Bobby's cabin. Jim and John's grand plan to allow Bobby to enter the complex was to have Gunter and her get married. Once Bobby becomes Gunter's spouse, then they'll both be tenants and she'll be the secondary tenant to Gunter's room. You could tell this was more John's idea than Jim's. John seemed a little too eager to watch them get married. Seeing a giant humanoid cryptid jump in excitement to see a wedding was something I wouldn't ever have guessed I found cute. Bobby and Gunter have been together for years, but never had a ceremony to make it official. Mila officiated the wedding in a rushed manner as we were short in time, but Jim and John still found it beautiful as they wept while watching. Bobby made a rusty iron nail and a splinter from her cabin turn into bands for the newlyweds. They sealed it with a kiss and had a quick cheer. We had no time to have a proper celebration and promised to celebrate later when we had time. Gunter took a few more splinters from Bobby's cabin and started turning one into a door. It was then that Bobby explained that she took a portion of the spell that was on my key and can now link any door to any room of her choosing. However, since my key had the unlocking spell, those doors can't be opened without my key. Bobby took Siad and smuggled her inside her gown while Gunter wrapped Mila around him again. We tested Bobby's new ability and instead of using my gold key, Bobby created a door to my room. We entered together while Bobby was hesitant. We all watched as Bobby slowly walked to the door and the green barrier that didn't appear when we paused formed. Bobby stopped and inspected the barrier for a moment. She reached out with her left hand and had her ring finger be the first to touch. Little blue sparks popped around her finger, but Bobby seemed unfazed by them. Her ring finger poked through and the barrier popped like a bubble and little blue sparks rained down. Bobby strided through the door and entered my room with no problem. We all smiled with relief. Bobby then grabbed Gunter's cornupica, held it, grabbed Gunter's hand and shoved it in. Gunter and Bobby then pulled out a fruit that looked like it was made out of leaking smoke. Gunter looked surprised and turned towards Bobby. "I missed you," Gunter said with care in his voice. "I know," Bobby replied confidently. Bobby let go of Gunter's hand, holding the fruit, and turned towards me. "No matter what happens, you get that door unlocked and get inside. We'll deal with our neighbors," Bobby states with the authority of a general. All I could reply was "Yes, ma'am." Bobby turned towards Jim and John. "You two, make sure the Wanderer doesn't jump in and follow us fast." Jim and John agreed and got serious. "Mila, you have the most important job of all. You need to distract Winthrop for just a moment. Gunter will have your back." Mila didn't say anything, but we knew she understood her assignment. "I'll worry about her and the Winchin. Are we ready?" Bobby questioned us loud and hard. We all took our places at my room's exit. Jim and John on the left, Mila on the wall to the right. Bobby stood in the middle while me and Gunter stood behind her. I held my silver key tightly when Gunter tapped my shoulder in our brief moment just before we moved. I looked back slightly. "Just know, thank you for everything," Gunter says with a grin. "You too, buddy," I reply with a brotherly grin. "Now!" Bobby uses her magic to swing open my door from a short distance. Her was right there with open arms and howl a scream that could deafen the deaf. Gunter leapfrogged over me and Bobby and threw a smoking fruit right into her face. Bobby placed a wind-bound barrier so that no smoke entered my room. Jim and John ran out first while her was still trying to figure out what was going on. Bobby sent another invisible blast to push her back as precaution while Jim and John headed out to their opponent. Mila clung to the walls and went to the right towards Winthrop. "It was time for me. Go straight and don't stop," Bobby commands. I sprint full speed forward and head first into the smoke screen. I kept my eyes wide and ignored all the sounds around me. The hallway was about 20 feet wide and I closed the gap in a short time, but it felt long. My hands were the first to feel the chains and I pulled myself towards the door. I followed the chains to the padlock and used my finger to find the keyhole. I found it right when I felt a huge gust of wind from my left that started clearing the smoke screen. I couldn't help but look when the cover was blown. Jim and John were in an intense hand-to-hand battle with the Wanderer. John's hand looked as if they were on fire as they punched the Wanderer from the left. Jim's size was also noticeably increased. He was at least 50% bigger, and his fur went from a mossy green to an almost blackish tone as he matched John's punches from the right. Their teamwork and unison in punches left the Wanderer no time to react as the force from one's punch pushed his face immediately into the other's punch. Gunter was to my right and standing behind a massive-sized Mila as she used her mask to block Winfrow's view of me. Bobby pinned her on the ceiling with some light emanating from her hand. Her stared down at me and screeched with anger as Bobby was using her other hand to cast a windbound barrier to pin the invisible windshield down on the ground behind me. I regained focus after meeting Bobby's anger gaze from me being distracted for a moment. I turned back the padlock I was grasping and shoved my key inside with my opposite hand. I turned the key and the link on the padlock popped open. The chains on the old door suddenly went limp and fell to the floor. The handleless door was now open. "Hurry!" Bobby yelled as I grabbed the door's plank to open it. I jumped through the door first. In one motion, Bobby pulled Jim and John back towards her and they flew like a guided fall towards her and then shifted through the door. She took the bound her and the gin and threw them at the Wanderer. Before they could even react, she yelled for Gunter. Gunter grabbed Mila's tail and jumped backwards to Bobby. Mila reduced her size quickly once she felt Gunter's grasp and trusted her friend to carry her to safety. Gunter, in humanely quick motion, grabbed Bobby too and jumped through the door. Once Mila's long body was fully inside, Bobby used her magic again to shut the door behind us. Bobby didn't hesitate and stood by the door speaking in some old language that I assume was a magic spell so they couldn't follow us in since the door is now unlocked. We all laid there in almost complete darkness if it weren't for John's hand still ablaze. I couldn't help but stare in confusion, as the fire seems to not be damaging Jim's hand. I asked Jim and John what the hell it was all about. Jim and John then reluctantly admitted that they didn't tell us all of their abilities. Jim's rays can ignite their internal body temperature to a heated point to always stay warm and deter predators. But Jim isn't very good at it and can only do his hands, which is something even children of his race can do. John explained, as he reduces his size and color of his fur, that he has a dormant alpha gene that he can shift into. However, it works like a muscle, and he would have to be doing the extent of a full body flex in order to turn into that form. It's exhausting, he says with a relief as he turns normal again. We suddenly heard Gunter yell, "Ew!" We turn to face him and see that he's set up and flinging off some kind of mucus. I lift up my arm with everyone else and we notice that the floor is covered with the stuff. The floor itself is also weirdly soft and squishy. Jim's hand don't illuminate much, but enough for Gunter to see what fruit he can scrounge up to help. He gets through about 6 before he picks up one that looks like a purple and yellow bug hive. Gunter shakes it hard and we hear an angry buzzing coming from it before he cracks it wide open. He tore the fruit in half and what looked like fireflies flew out and surrounded us. They dispersed quickly, but one was bright enough to easily illuminate the whole room. They took off down the halls around us while a few stayed and hovered around their broken new home. We could see around us now and it was not a pretty sight. The floor, walls, and ceiling were glistening with that mucus that we were covered in. Every surface was a pinkish red and had pulsating blood-red cracks going through them. We all were inspecting our surrounding area. Bobby even noticed what was surrounding the door while she continued casting her spells. What looked like thick red and purple veins started coming out of the walls and began sealing the door shut for her. This concerned Bobby. Bobby slowly stopped casting her spells and let the room of flesh bind the door shut for her. "Guys, what the fuck is this?" I asked loudly to get someone to answer. No one replied. I called out Bobby's name and she admitted she's never seen anything like this. There were 3 rounded hallways. One connected to each wall that wasn't the door we just entered from. The left one made an immediate turn to the left. The one in the middle went down a bit longer before turning and other halls were on the sides. The right hallway led into a sizable open room with several visible walls and turns. Gunter was the first to recommend that we don't split up. We don't know this place or if it morphs. Jim and John agreed that the open room should be the one we enter since it had more space. Bobby retorts that an open space also makes for the perfect trap. My idea was the stupid one, judging by the looks I got after I did it. "Klaus!" I yelled around and was met by angry glances from my friends. I shrugged and tried to laugh it off to lighten the mood, but my friends' faces shifted from anger to fear. Not at me, but behind me. I turned back towards we came in and saw the cracks from the old door exaggerated by the darkness protruding through them. An all too familiar black shadow was slowly creeping through the door's cracks. I yelled that we need to move now. We turned to make our choice and saw that the halls were slowly getting smaller. If we go to our left or straight, we might get trapped in the shrinking hallways. We had no choice but to choose the right path into the open room. We ran quick, but with no next direction or specific person to follow, we all began to naturally split up in our panic. It didn't matter, as the other halls also began shrinking. A pulsating sound became noticeably louder down the hallways that surrounded us. We all grouped back together in the center and tried looking for a hallway that wasn't shrinking. Some of the upper hallways above us began secreting a thick red liquid that we could only guess was blood. They dripped down the halls and began pooling onto the floors. The hallway shrunk to the size of a fist before stopping. All began bleeding. The only hallway to not shrink was the room we just came from. The few bright fireflies that clung onto the ceiling from earlier allowed us to watch as the blood pools began connecting to the floor. We were trapped. The room we came from darkened from the left, and the blood pool began to enter the room as well. Ripples can be seen coming from the darkness where the door is. We all got ready. We'll have to escape from where we came and regroup later. With no time to plan, we all began to get into position to fight. Jim and Mila grew in size. John reignited his fists. Gunter desperately dug in his cornucopia to find something. Bobby's hand glowed with his cyan-colored magic, and all I could do was raise my fist and sweat. What came was not who we expected at all, as him walked into the room. We all stared in a quiet confusion as him stood there in the shallow pool of blood we all stood in. In a well-lit illuminated room of flesh stood the black shadow of a trench coat. What was also unexpected was the sound that came next. A low, guttural voice that sounded more like a growl than words came.
"Welcome."
The blood was about halfway up our feet now, almost enough to make our toes no longer visible. Him continued speaking.
"I've waited so long for you."
Even without eyes, we all somehow knew him was talking to me. He continued.
"Well, not you exactly, but someone dumb enough to finally let me back in."
Immediate regret screamed in my head. Two ripples began to form in front of him, parallel to his feet. The blood that carpeted the floor began to flow upward in a narrow stance that resembled vein trails. We should have never come here, were the thoughts ringing in my mind. I don't know if those thoughts were mine or the others from the Hive Link, but I know we were all thinking it. Bobby was the first to try to react. She began weaving a spell with a dark purple aura, and when it was released, nothing happened. Him began to laugh.
"Rule 3.
He said simply. I tried to shift my stance, but was unable to budge my feet. The blood pool that submerged our feet was holding us in place. The others just watched as the vein trail converged and began forming the mass that resembled the bottom of a torso. We couldn't do anything but wait and hope. The blood trail framed the body, then the arms, and then the head. He was creating a body. After the veins were formed, Muscle tissue began to creep out of the pool of blood we stood in and worked its way up. The head was the most disturbing. No mouth or eye sockets were formed. It was just a head of muscle tissue and nothing else. Him's arms raised and the walls of this room looked like curtains being pulled up by an unforeseen force. The flesh walls wrapped the body of flesh and blood like a blanket. The now-skinned body was as red as the flesh walls. It stood limp and lifeless until him began walking towards it. The shadow of him embraced the flesh doll from behind, and the doll moved in unison to him's movement. The shadow of him dressed the flesh in an open trench coat and a fedora. This thing began caressing its new form.
"Oh, how I miss the warmth,"
him said. He began to feel his blank face. He then shoved 2 fingers from each hand into where his eyes would be and pulled them open. I felt sick watching this thing tear itself open. Once 2 eye sockets were now present, he then took his right hand and with 4 fingers shoved it into where its mouth would be. He pulled and stretched to create him a new face. When he was done, he finally directed this thing's face towards us. His mouth and eyes, if you can even call it that, were just open sockets of flesh, bleeding from his own attack and torn skin thinned out like ribbons. "You're Klaus?" I asked stupidly.
"Almost,"
he answered.
"I just need a few more things before I'm whole again."
Before I could question him anymore, he lunged forward and was inches away from John in an instant. He then shoved his hand deep into John's chest. We all tried stopping him, but we were still held by the blood pool. Jim was just out of arm's reach and couldn't stop what happened next. John grabbed Klaus' arms to try and fight back, but even with his strength and size, he was no match for this thing. We all watched helplessly as Klaus pulled his hands from John's chest and was holding a messy blood of flesh. John stared at what Klaus was holding while holding his open chest in disbelief. Jim never stopped trying to reach for John. Klaus' hands moved with the motion of the flesh he held. It was John still beating hard. Klaus's face formed a smile and he shoved John's heart down into his own chest. Jim realized he can't help while being held down. Jim grabbed his own shin and calf and began pulling his leg out of his trapped foot. Our screams were a mix of yelling for John while some begged for Jim to stop. Jim ripped his right leg off his trapped foot. John's eyes turned from Klaus and then to Jim. Tears ran down both their faces as they looked to each other helplessly. John reached out to Jim and Jim reached back. Jim was able to grab John's hand with the extra distance he got from getting rid of the one trapped leg. Both of them collapsed into the bloody floor. We turned our attention towards Klaus as he began laughing maniacally.
"Just one last thing,"
he said to himself. We all could tell we weren't his primary target anymore. He turned and began walking away. "Klaus!" I screamed towards the new monster we've unleashed. It didn't stop walking away or even gave my call a fraction of a second worth of attention. I felt like a gnat compared to this thing. I kept screaming his name to command him to come back, but as he turned the corner towards the door we entered from, I could tell I meant nothing to him anymore. I stumbled and noticed our feet were released as soon as he was out of sight. We all ran towards John and Jim. John was trying to talk to Jim, but was stopped by the blood he was bleeding internally. Jim kept yelling for John to hold on. Gunther searched his entire person for a fruit that could help, but every fruit he pulled began to immediately rot when they touched the air of this room. Bobby tried casting healing spells, but none affected John when they connected. Jim begged John to hold on. John kept coughing up blood and we were running out of time. John held Jim's face as he began to slowly fade away. He tried his best to tell Jim something, but his eyes became blank and looked past us all. John fell limp in Jim's arm. We lost him. We lost Klaus. We lost all. The blood that once flooded the room is turning dark and sinking into the floors. The room's walls and ceiling are turning brown with rot after Klaus left. We think whatever flesh he left with was also keeping this whole room alive and is now dying without it there. We're trapped inside as I'm typing this up. Bobby and Mila are trying to open the door we entered from, but the link to the Pandemonium Complex seems to be severed. By Klaus or Winthrop, we simply don't know. Me and Gunter have tried using my keys to his doors, but none open a gateway and just open to the room we are already in. Jim is holding John away from us and screaming in sorrow. We don't know what to do or how to get out of this. We messed up. We shouldn't have looked for Klaus. We've unleashed pure evil onto the tenants. We can only hope Winthrop can stop him. Pray for us and the Pandemonium Complex.